How's going, guys? Welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the sage of the DWMA and built Harem in Soul Eater, Part 3. Huge shout out to Dark Wizard King 69 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Inside the independent cube, many of the Shibuya students kept in small groups, some hiding out in corners. As for Sid and Shinigami on the other hand, they too were waiting near a wall, Sid sitting down, leaning against it. Sid sighed and said, "This day turned into one hell of a disaster." Shinigami sighed and said, "I agree, Sid. I didn't think that our own school nurse could be a witch." Sid looked lost in thought, and Shinigami asked, "Is something wrong, Sid?" Sid still looked forward but said, "I wish I could have gotten you out as well, but that's not what really worries me." Shinigami then said, "It's about Maka and the others, isn't it?" Sid nodded and said, "Not just them, but Naruto too. I saw the look in his eyes, and they were of a man on the verge of breaking. It was of a war veteran returning. It was horrifying." Shinigami nodded and said, "Well, Maka and the others will be fine, they are resilient kids, but you are right about Naruto, he has had a very bad history concerning betrayal, and I'm afraid this just adds to it." One of the students, Killick, came over to where Shinigami and Sid were, and asked, "Lord Death, what's going on here? If Medusa-sensei was a witch, how could she have hidden herself?" Shinigami turned to Killick and said, "She must have used Soul Protect. With that active, she could walk around unnoticed." Killick then asked, "Soul Protect, a witch technique, right? Isn't there some way to counter it?" Shinigami sighed and said, "I'm afraid that this battle between us and witches has been going on for centuries. With each generation, we devised new ways to counter witch spells, but in contrast, they developed new methods of their own. Soul Protect was just the latest." Still a bit confused, Killick asked, "Isn't there any way to counter it though? I mean, there has to be a way." Sid shook his head and said, "It's impossible. The only way would be to Kishinize." Killick looked at Sid as if he were crazy and said, "Kishinize? What do you mean?" Shinigami sighed and said, "It seems it's useless to hide it any longer. If you cover something with a lid, it is only a matter of time before we pop the lid to show what's underneath." He called for everyone's attention, and when all eyes were on him, he said, "There is a Kishin in Shibuya's basements." Sid's sweat dropped and said, "That was a little too short, don't you think?" Shinigami continued and said, "This was before Shibuya was created. There was a man named Azura, and this is his story. Azura covered his head with long scarves, and wore 5 or 6 shirts on him. He refused to believe or trust his heart to anyone. He was a human with an extremely careful soul. He was the strongest between my 8 warriors, but he was always terrified, with the greatest fear possible. He attached himself to power, he forgot all discipline, and began to take souls that were not on the list. It was the beginning of madness, the birth of Kishin." Killick then asked, "But wasn't he a Meister? How could he eat human souls?" Shinigami sighed and said, "He was also terrified of his weapon partner, so he ate him, completely." Oxton said, "What? How is that even possible?" Shinigami then said, "Now that I think about it, I don't know if he was ever human at all. I didn't know what lay in the deepest part of his heart, fear." Ox shivered, and Shinigami asked, "Is something wrong, Ox?" Ox tried to suppress his shivering, and said, It's about Naruto-san's change. I honest to God, never felt so terrified." "What the hell happened to him?" Shinigami and Sid looked at each other, and Shinigami said, "Well, the thing is, Naruto's power draws from pure darkness. And I don't mean simple shadows, no, I mean pitch black, scare you shitless darkness. His powers grow under different conditions, but emotional pain is a very large contributor. I'm not sure even he is aware of how far it can grow." Killick then asked, "I can get that, but he always seemed so prepared, so ready, why is that?" Sid then said, "Well, as you all may know, Naruto isn't from around here, but what you don't know is that he comes from a culture that revolves around something you may not believe." Everyone gave him questioning looks, and Shinigami said, "Naruto comes from a culture of ninja, and not the stereotypical mask-wearing disappear with the smoke bomb kind. Now, where he came from, he dealt with a massive war. I believe he called it the fourth great ninja war. It is in this war that he gained his power, but lost something dear to him. Kilik, a little unnerved, asked, "What did he lose?" Shinigami had a sad tone in his voice and said, "His friends, those he considered family, and the love of his life." His voice then took a slightly darker tone, and he said, "But once his power grew, he faced the army of the Akatsuki, and in his rage slaughtered them like pigs. All 100,000 of them. If everyone didn't show fear before, they did now." Kilik then said, He killed 100,000 people?" Shinigami nodded and said, "He did, but would you not wish for revenge if it was the ones you loved that were killed?" Everyone merely stood in silence, their admiration for the classmate growing. Beneath Shibuya, Stein led Maka and the others down winding stairways, and on their way down, Maka asked, "Say, kid, how did Lord Death seal Azura away?" Kid looked back a bit and said, "Father tore off Azura's skin and used it to seal him. He made the skin into a bag, and after draining Azura's blood, stuffed him into the bag. Then, he rooted his own soul into the ground, in order to prevent Azura from trying to escape." Black Star then said, "So that's why he can't leave the city?" Maka then asked, "If that's the case, then if the seal is broken, and the Kishin gets away, then wouldn't Lord Death be able to move freely?" Stein shook his head and said, "He wouldn't. Lord Death is rooted to the ground. His soul became a part of Death City. If he were to go anywhere, this city would need legs. But that is impossible. But if the Kishin were to escape, the world will suffer. After all, craziness is contagious." Soul felt a tug at his mind, and he saw he was in the black room once again, the red ogre standing in front of him, a record playing. The ogre pointed at his head, in the same manner Krona did, and said, "Soul, you cannot resist it. Hell is here. A person's heart is a very fragile thing, no matter how strong they are. Come, the craziness awaits you." Soul thought, a person's heart, huh? That would explain how Naruto reacted. The ogre then said, "You cannot escape, you are like the needle on a record." Soul scoffed and said, "Are you kidding? Trying to convince me like that, you should know that the needle can always fly away." The ogre smirked and said, "Fine, I can wait." Death City streets. Blair, in her cat form, was walking toward the market, unaware of the chaos in the streets. She said out loud, "Wow, it must be a festival, it's so animated around here. Christmas Eve at Shibuya, I wanted to go, but I'm not authorized. I couldn't do anything at Kabakura. I don't have money, so I can't go shopping, there's nothing to do. The only thing I can do is go to the fish cellar and give my innocent look." She arrived at the fish stall, only to find it destroyed, the guy running it on the ground, unconscious. She looked around and noticed the Mizun sisters tearing up the city. She tipped her hat a bit, and vanished, only to appear next to the nearest Mizun sister, and deliver a quick kick to the face, forcing the witch to slam into the rooftops, making her bounce like a rock on a pond. Blair skidded to a stop on the roof, and saw the witch slam into a nearby wall. Blair then said, "You five have a lot of nerve, thinking you can go around wrecking the place." Mizun picked herself out of the wall, and flew up to her sisters, who, like her, had a smirk on her face, as they each readied the beam Haish. Blair simply tipped her hat and said, "Such impertinent worries." She kept calm on the outside, but inside thought, that darkness from before, I hope Naruto-kun is alright. Beneath Shibuya, Maka and the others continued to run down the seemingly endless hallway, and Black Star asked, "We've been running for a while, say Maka, can you sense the resonance of the witches' souls ahead?" Maka replied, "Yes, it must have come from the Soul Protect, but there's something else." Everyone looked back, or front in Black Star's case, as she said, "Naruto-kun is also up ahead, but it's like he's waiting for something." Soul, in his scythe form, said, "He must be waiting on us, being able to teleport around like that means he escaped ahead of us. But he was like in his own little world, it was unsettling." Kid nodded and said, "It makes sense, he must have wanted to hold a line, in case any of Medusa's group tried to come this way, in order to prevent us from going further." Stein smiled, though none of them saw it, and he thought, Naruto really affected them, and for the better. Maka then felt a reaction and said, "Dr. Stein, there's someone ahead." Stein then asked, "Who is it? Naruto? Medusa?" Maka shook her head, and as the figure came out of the shadows, she said, "No, it's Papa." Spirit grinned and said, "Looks like I got here in time." Stein smirked and said, "Good thing too. I don't want to even think of how far I would get without a weapon." Spirit soon lost his grin and said, "It's gonna be close, isn't it?" As he slowly turned into his weapon form, Spirit said, "It's up to us to stop the Kishin from reviving." Stein nodded and said, "All right, I want all of you to stay in weapon form for the time being, and no matter what, do not change out of it. A single attack can end your life, but as weapons, you don't need to worry." They then felt a large pressure, and Black Star said, "What the hell was that?" Their answer came in the form of a dark corridor opening in front of them. When it vanished, Naruto was left in its place, but something changed. The spikes on his back were gone, replaced with two black snake-like appendages coming up and out of his shoulders. Each had a large set of razor-like teeth, and strange glowing yellow markings, with black spikes coming out of what would be their spines. Naruto looked back at them, and he said, "It's good you have arrived, the battle will begin soon. Our first obstacle is just up ahead." Maka sensed a soul slowly approaching, and said, "He's right, and it's a very strong soul." Black Star, unable to sense souls, said, "I can hear footsteps, but only for one person." Stein then said, "For it to be only one person, they must be able to delay all of us, dealing with multiple enemies at once." Naruto closed his eyes and said, "I have seen this before. Each of their group will stop on a certain part of the path, in order to deter us. This way, the one with the objective will have the time to get to their destination, while we waste time trying to defeat our obstacles one at a time." Stein raised an eyebrow and said, "Yes, that's what I think is happening. We really must sit down and talk more of your exploits. But now we have bigger problems. Black Star, it will be your job to take the Maken, as you can directly use your wavelength against it. Maka, you and Kid should focus on ones carrying the black blood, and make sure it doesn't reach the Kishin." Naruto then started to growl, the snakes hissing along with him, as Medusa stepped out of the shadows, a smirk on her face. Naruto drew out Soul Eater and Void Gear, holding them in a twin sword stance, and he said, "Everyone go, I will deal with her." Everyone looked at him as if he were crazy, and Maka said, "But are you sure?" Naruto looked back for a second, and said, "I am. Your job will be to deal with the others. I will make sure she never leaves here." "Now go," Medusa smirked and said. "A strategy meeting under the enemy's nose?" "I heard everything." Naruto scoffed and said, "You could hear our life story. Won't change the fact that you will pay for what you have done." Medusa began to chant, "Snake, snake, Kabira Cobra." Naruto and the others got ready, and Naruto said, "When you get the chance, run as fast as you can." Medusa finished chanting, and in a display of power, Vector Arrow! A giant mass of arrows came from behind her, each one honed in on the group. Naruto held up a hand and said, "Guard." A large wall appeared in front of them, blocking the arrows from going further. Naruto looked back and said, "Now's your chance." Kid and Black Star nodded, and they each sped off ahead, Kid using his skateboard, Black Star using U2 mode to enhance his speed. Maka slightly hesitated, but after seeing Naruto so stone-faced, she quickly ran ahead. Medusa turned in order to redirect her attack, but the second she did, she felt a strong punch hit her square in the stomach. She looked up, and noticed it was Naruto who did it. Stein merely stood back, and Spirit asked, "Are we gonna step in?" Stein shook his head and said, "Only if he's taken down, otherwise I wouldn't. Who knows what Naruto will do in his current state of mind?" Naruto grabbed her front and threw her to the wall. Naruto's eyes showed a tremendous amount of killer intent, scaring Medusa a little. She then said, "Looks like it's just you and me, Naruto-kun. Those little friends of yours will fall, you know." Naruto growled, the snakes snapping at Medusa, and Naruto said, "Is that so? And this comes from the witch that studied the meisters of this school. You must not have taken very accurate notes, because unlike you, I have faith in them." His eyes became showed by his hair, as he said, "They are far stronger than you give them credit for, but it's not them you need to worry about. You should focus on your own life. Seeing as I will be the one to take it from you." Kid, using his skateboard, rushed down the hallway, looking like a blur to Krona, who said, "Oh no, he got past so easily. I'm gonna get scolded again, I hate that." She turned back, and saw Black Star standing there, Tsubaki in her ninja blade mode. Black Star scoffed and said, You look weak. No wonder Naruto trashed your sorry ass not once, but twice from what I hear. Krona's disposition went from worried to demented, and Black Star said, Geez, what a freaky girl. Doesn't matter, I can still make a show out of you. Maka ran up behind him and said, Hold on Black Star, this one's mine. Tsubaki then said, But Maka, Dr. Stein told us that Black Star should face her. Black Star let an arrogant smirk cross his face and said, You should listen Maka, ruining my big entrance like that dash. He was cut off, as Maka held her blade in front of Black Star, and Black Star said, Geez lady, don't go getting ahead of yourself, or I will kill you. Maka smirked and said, Shut up, you talk big. But you know if you tried anything, Naruto-kun would be on your ass. Black Star saw a surprising amount of anger in Maka's eyes and he said, Fine, guess you got to that rebellious age, huh? Fine, I'll leave this scene to you. Maka said nothing and Black Star said, If it gets dangerous, just shout, and I'll come to the rescue. Maka scoffed and said, Fat chance, now get going, kid is gonna need your help more than me. Black Star nodded, and in a flash, used his speed star technique to rush past Krona. When she turned her attention to attack Black Star, Maka rushed her, catching her in the blade of her scythe, and delivered a harsh punch to the face. Maka felt her fist hit lead, and thought, damn, it's like punching lead. But so long as I have her pinned, I can control this. In a daring move, Maka jumped up, aligning her feet, and delivered a double dropkick to Krona's face. The force of the kick launched her back, causing her to skid across the floor, landing on her back. An insane smile spread across Krona's face, and she said, That's ridiculous. I don't understand how that brat can touch me so easily. Ragnarok, in an angry voice, said, Kill her. Krona merely got up, while Maka held a look of confidence. Soul asked, Maka, you gotta reduce your speed or else I may not have the power to fight her sword and win. Do we even have a chance of winning this one? Maka smiled and said, Maybe not, but you never know. I may have to use that dot. Soul started to laugh and said, Damn, Naruto must have rubbed off on you more than I thought, but we still have this psycho to beat. Ragnarok then came out of Krona's shoulder and said, Don't make fun of me. Whatever you'll do, it won't work. Did you forget you can't injure Krona? Maybe if you had your boyfriend here, he might, but not a weakling like you. Maka smirked and said, Well, you actually got it right. At least this time you see me as more than food. And then there's her. I was afraid of her for a while, but now, I'm not afraid, in fact. Krona shirked away from Maka's gaze, unable to look her in the eyes. Krona then said, Stop it, I can't look at such determined eyes. Maka smirked and said, I can have a confident look, because I'm stronger than I was last time, so I can't lose. Ragnarok chuckled and said, Yeah, how many times have I heard that before? It sounds like a dog that needs to howl because it can't get back home. Maka ignored the weapon's words and said, What, can't speak for yourself? I'm Maka the Scythe Meister, and you? Krona kept looking away, but said, I'm Krona, the demon swordswoman. Maka then gained a wide smirk, unnerving both Soul and Krona, and said, Now that the pleasantries are out of the way, it's time to get started. Krona surprised them by cutting her wrists, the black blood flowing freely. Maka was almost surprised when Krona flicked her wrist, sending a blade of blood right at her, forcing her to dodge. Krona was then right in front of her, a blood blade poised to strike her down, only for Maka to use her scythe blade from her own wrist to block. The blood liquefied, and she said, It can solidify and liquefy freely? Ragnarok, from the sword, said, How the hell could you block that? Maka smirked and said, You're not the only girl with weapon blood in her veins. She heard a cry of bloody needle, prompting her to jump back to avoid the pitch-black spikes. Krona got into an odd stance, though she was interrupted by Maka, who used a scythe blade-enhanced uppercut, along with a slash from Soul, forcing Krona to get on the defensive. Naruto felt the wavelength, and said, It seems Maka-chan is facing that prized demon sword of yours. Medusa arrogantly smirked and said, Is she now? That girl is going to get herself killed. To her, Stein's, and Spirit's surprise, Naruto and his duo of snakes started to laugh, though the snakes merely made hissing sounds. Naruto then said, How ignorant of you. I do hope you realize I was the one to train her, to make her push herself to grow. She's not the same girl who lost in Florence, so no. If there is anyone you need to worry about, it's the demon's sword. One of the snakes growled, and to Naruto's shock, in his mind, with a whispery yet twisted voice, said, "She is an annoyance." Naruto then thought, "You can speak? Great, just when I was getting used to not having a voice in my head all the time." The snake laughed and said, "I can. I am of a race of creatures called Darklings, one of the many races of dark beings that dark users such as yourself have called upon in the past. Think of me as a familiar, or what those from your world would call me, a summon of sorts. Your powers have grown enough to bring me to you, or rather, I was always with you, ever since the door to your heart was opened to darkness." Naruto chuckled, and thought, "I always seem to get crazy shit, so what can you do?" He heard the snake laugh, and say, "Let me show you." Naruto felt his body move on its own, his shadow growing a bit, one of the snake heads diving into it, only to erupt from Medusa's shadow, nearly ripping her head from her shoulders. It was stopped by one of Medusa's snakes, forcing it to retreat back to Naruto's shoulder. Naruto then thought, sneak attack, a classic. He then heard, "My power grows as you do, there will be much more in store than a simple sneak attack." Naruto then thought, "I'll take your word on that, but right now I'll handle this my way, we'll work on you later." He then heard, "Agreed, but if I can, I won't hesitate to strike her down." Naruto grinned and thought, "I have a feeling this is the start of a wonderful partnership." The snake said nothing, merely nodding its head. Medusa stared bewildered at Naruto and said, "What the hell? I always knew your dark powers were strong, but that's certainly new." Naruto smirked and said, "Well, I do enjoy surprising people, just look at your feet." Medusa raised an eyebrow, and noticed chains erupt from the ground, tying her to the ground. Stein, who saw that, thought, "It's just like the Soul Sutra, interesting." Naruto kept an impassive face as he said, "When it comes to my parents, two facts stick out most. My mother had the power of chakra chains, and my father, well," Naruto vanished in a burst of speed, only for Medusa to hear, "My father was known as the fastest man alive." Medusa turned her head, only to see Naruto's fist hit her in the chin, blasting her toward the wall. Naruto then clenched his fist, and chains erupted from the wall behind her, trapping her once again. Medusa smirked and said, "My, tying me up like this, I didn't know you were that kind of person, Naruto-kun." Naruto merely lifted his right hand, and said, "No more jokes, no more chances. I had hoped I could prevent your plan, by giving you a reason to stay. But it seems I wasted my time. So now I'll demonstrate what we did in my homeland, in terms of assassination." His right hand became coated in black and red lightning, the sound of birds chirping filled the hallway. Medusa was shaking and asked, "What is that?" Naruto smirked and said, "Chidori, 1,000 birds. Normally, I could never use this technique, but thanks to my chakra weakening, I finally have enough control to use it. Now then, any last words?" Medusa said nothing, and Naruto charged forward, aiming right for her heart. Medusa then said 2 words. "Vector plate." An arrow symbol formed on the ground at Naruto's feet, and when it glowed, he felt himself get pushed back. He looked down, and saw the arrow pointed back, and thought, "Shit, it's just like the Shinra Tensei." Medusa smirked and said, "Like it? It's my vector plate. I can force you to go in the direction it's pointing in." She then had one of her snakes break the chains that held her to the wall, and she crouched on the plate. She then said, "But I can use it too, allowing me to move a certain way." She then launched herself forward, all the while creating 3 more arrows, allowing to speed herself up, getting behind Naruto. She went for a kick to his head, only having to dodge one of his snakes. She slid across the floor, only to stop. She noticed the snakes looking weak, and said, "Those familiars look a bit pale." Naruto then thought, "What's going on?" He then heard, "I thrive in darkness, being in the light like this weakens me. Stick to the shadows." Got it. Naruto drew out Soul Eater in its double polearm state, with one end pointed away from his body. He twisted his body sharply, dragging the blade behind him, causing a gust of wind to blow around them, blowing out the torches around them, leaving the ones near Stein the only ones still lit. Medusa felt a feeling of dread, and she saw something that scared her, Naruto. His eyes glowed yellow, as did his snakes, and with a flick of his wrists, the snakes charged, each gunning for her neck, only for Medusa to shout, "Vector storm!" A tornado of arrows erupted around her, forcing the snakes to back up. Medusa smirked and said, "I have hundreds of snakes inside me. Most who get too close to me never get back up." Naruto snarled and said, "Such is the treachery of a snake, it seems." Medusa gave a seductive smirk and said, "Now Naruto-kun, don't be like that." A circle of arrows enclosed the two, each arrow pointing toward them. "Now you can't escape. You must face me with snakes around you, and in me. What I want, I never let go." Naruto felt a reaction, similar to when he gained a blade of darkness, and on instinct, he held his arms to his side, and twin blades appeared in his hands. The first had a slight reach. The hilt guard is comprised of two bat-like wings extending downward. The teeth are in the shape of the kanji for darkness. The keychain's token was a black crown. A chain-like design runs up the length of the blade. The diamond in its hilt was of a violet shade. The second blade shaft displays two hearts, and its handle bearing two angel wings, contrasting the bat wings that comprise Oblivion's handle. The teeth are fashioned in the shape of the kanji for light, corresponding to the Oblivion's kanji for darkness. Its keychain token was Kairi's Wayfinder, a star sewn together from thalassa shells. Naruto didn't feel the darkness in him grow, instead he felt light. He then heard, "Those blades, they are of the light. It seems your darkness has grown enough to require such a counterbalance." Naruto then thought, blades of light? The white one I get, but the other, it kinda seems ironic. The names of the blades creeped into his head, and he droned out, "Oblivion Oath Keeper. Heh, now Oath Keeper fits me, that's the kind of guy I am." He heard, "True, but I will need to rest for now. You have far too much light radiating from you at the moment, it burns. I will return, once you call on the darkness again." The snakes then disappeared, fading away, leaving Naruto to deal with Medusa. Medusa, seeing the snakes disappear, saw the torches reigniting, and said, It might have been better with the light off." Naruto gripped the hilts of his new blades in fury, and said, "Shut up!" He made a slashing motion, and a blade of light slashed out, nearly taking Medusa's head off. Naruto slipped his swords into a reverse grip, then asked, "I'm curious, you want the Kishin awake, but what about that girl? After all this is said and done, what happens to her?" Medusa smirked and said, "How cute you actually care. It's funny, seeing as you actually care, but you see, Krona is my real daughter." Naruto's eyes widened, then narrowed. Maka dodged the blood blades that came out of Krona's wrists, and took a swing at Krona's side, only for Krona to catch it in her hand, causing her palm to bleed. Maka leaned back to avoid a spear of blood from piercing her head. Maka then said, "Nothing is working, we have to use it." Soul replied, "You sure?" Maka nodded, and the two meisters gained a bit of distance from each other. Anyone nearby could feel their souls begin to grow in strength, a sign of the soul resonance technique. Naruto felt a reaction and said, "What the hell happened?" Medusa smirked and said, "So, the black blood is starting to boil." Naruto slashed at her head, prompting her to move, and he said, "If something happens to her, I will destroy every little piece of you." Maka and Krona continued the use of soul resonance, or in Krona's case the scream resonance, until both had their best technique in hand. For Maka, it was the Witch Hunter, for Krona, it was Screech Alpha. Maka charged forward, the Witch Hunter enhancing her slashes, as she slashed horizontally, then vertically, and finally, an attack to Krona's neck, only to her shock, have it blocked by only a single arm. Maka was too shocked, she barely noticed getting pushed back, and she said, "How the hell can a witch have so much physical strength?" Krona tilted her head and said, "The black blood in my veins is tied to me, and fights with me. A weakling like you can't win. And now it's my turn." Krona was in front of Maka and said, "Screech Gamma." She then let loose a barrage of sword swipes, coming from different angles and directions. Soul felt the red ogre creep into his mind, and as the flurry continued, he heard, "Come on, Soul, it's pointless to resist. I said you were insignificant, you must get stronger." Maka was blasted back, and she asked, "Are you alright, Soul?" She only got a "yeah" as a response. She then thought, "Shit, this is getting harder than I thought. I don't think I can keep this up." Not even my weapon blood is able to cut her. Death City streets. Blair watched as the 5 Mizun came straight at her, jumping at the last minute, using the first Mizun as a stepping stone to reach a larger height, which put her above 3 of the other Mizun. With a sadistic grin, she unleashed Smashing Pumpkin! A giant pumpkin that slammed the trio into the ground, leaving a slight indent, but still harmed the trio. The last Mizun, thinking Blair had a disadvantage being in the air, rushed at her along with the first Mizun, only for Blair to dodge the first, and again dodge the last, only to kick the 5th Mizun in the stomach, launching her into the air. Blair landed on the ground, and with a smirk said, I may be a girl, but I'm far from kind. But I can't deal with all 5 at once, this sucks. The Mizuns slowly got back into the air, each having a confident smirk, and to Blair's surprise started to stack on top of each other. In a puff of smoke that reminded Blair of Naruto's clones, 5 Mizun became 1. She still had the mouse hat, only it grew in size, and she now had her pink hair go down to her shoulders. Her dress was the combination of what the other Mizun wore, though her stomach and a portion of her breasts were exposed. Mizun smirked and said, Don't raise your head, pussycat. It makes you look like a lost kitty with no way out. Blair tipped her hat, and in a puff of smoke, changed into her human form. The 2 witches walked toward each other until they were in each other's faces. Mizun smirked and said, I'll eat you, kid. Blair then said, The bigger the mouth, the nastier things that come out of it. Blair felt a hand on her breast, and noticed it was Mizun. Mizun arrogantly smirked and said, What a vulgar body. Blair let a smile cross her face, and she said, Still such a brat, huh? She then grabbed the bottom of Mizun's short top, pulled it up and said, Let's see what you got under here. Beneath Shibuzen, Maka was on her knees panting, tired from having to keep up with Krona. Krona slowly walked over to her, dragging her sword behind her. She then said, You're afraid. We're alike, yet there are things I still don't know. Just like with my rabbit. Krona's mind went back to her childhood, where Medusa gave her a choice, kill a rabbit, or be stuck in a dark room. Krona failed to kill the rabbit a couple times, getting her stuck in the room with Ragnarok. On the 3rd try, she did it without hesitation. Now back in the present, in her mind, she saw Maka as the little rabbit. Soul saw that Maka was about to be killed, and he felt the ogre once again creep into his thoughts, saying, Soul! Hey Soul! At this rate, you're finished. Leave this to me, I'm much stronger. Soul replied, No! I have faith in my own strength, but… He felt himself be drawn into the black room once more, and he began to argue with the red ogre. Neither gained any ground until… Okay, 2 seconds, let's calm down a little here. Let's summarize. In a conversation, it's rude to interrupt someone when they are speaking, correct? Soul scoffed and said, Yeah, it is. The ogre went over to one of the curtains and said, Good, then I propose we head to the rest room. We should let democracy decide this. The curtain flew open, and to Soul's surprise, Maka stepped out, in a black ballroom-style dress. Maka! Maka then said, Usually you listen when I talk. Soul got out of his seat and said, How can you be here? These meetings take place in my soul. The ogre answered, saying, Because you two are under high spiritual resonance. When I pulled Soul down here, it wasn't too hard to bring her to. Soul sighed and said, So what, you made a fake Maka to try and convince me? The only response he got was Maka hitting him on the head with her trademark book, and he said, Yeah, that's the real Maka all right. The ogre sighed and said, All right, now let's relax with a little music. He went over to the record player, setting the needle on the record. As the duo got into position, Maka said, You have to lead, I can't really dance. Soul replied, Fine by me. The ogre snapped his fingers, saying, And a 5, 6, 7, 8. The duo began to dance, Soul leading, and he asked, Why did you come here? You two can hear my voice? Maka looked down a little and said, I don't know, I think I could, ever since we fought the werewolf. The ogre spoke up, saying, Yeah, we are both inside you. But she disappeared for a time, I don't know why. Soul then said, But she doesn't have anything to do here. She shouldn't be back. Maybe this time she won't disappear. Maka looked down and said, I thought of something, maybe it's because of the synchronization of our soul frequencies. Soul caught what she was trying to say and asked, Do you want to use me like Ragnarok? That's crazy. Maka hung her head and said, I can't stop thinking of how she countered Witch Hunter. If I can have a strength equal to her magic sword, Krona, I could then feel her soul wavelength. Soul was flabbergasted, and he asked, Don't you realize the danger? You could go crazy. Maka held a confident smirk and said, I'm sure that won't happen. Soul groaned and said, Well, I'm not. Maka smiled coyly and said, But it will be cool, won't it? Soul gave up and said, Alright, I get it. You may decide what happens, but as your weapon, I will make sure you return to normal. Besides, if anything were to happen to you under my watch, Naruto would skin me alive. Maka giggled and said, Oh, that's for sure. The peaceful moment was ruined by Soul having a painful expression on his face, seeing as Maka stepped on his toes, while wearing high-heeled shoes. She meekly asked, Why don't you lead? Soul replied, Sure, leave it to me. The ogre smirked and said, It's done. Krona slashed at Maka's head, only for her blade to be blocked by Maka's arm. An insane grin crossed Maka's face, and before Krona realized it, Maka took her scythe, the blade across Krona's chest, and flung her down the hallway, tossing her straight into the arches in the ceiling. Maka stuck her scythe blade into the ground, and stood on the pole, a demented smirk never leaving her face. She held her hand over her eyes, as if to see into the distance, and said, Wow, she flew so far. Kid raced down his section of the hallway on his skateboard, only to narrowly duck a toad-shaped object. Looking back, he saw it explode. Patty looked ahead and noticed the hallway was filled with bombs of the same shape. Kid looked ahead and said, It's not symmetrical, it's giving me a stomachache. Up ahead, Free and Iruka were getting close to the sealed chamber. Free paused and said, Can you feel it? Iruka nodded and Free said, There's a Kishin near. Liz sighed and said, Crud, Naruto was right. But it's an advantage for us, at least we can get through. And this way, we won't provoke them. Kid looked down the hallway for a second, and was on his knees second from barfing. Liz had a tick on her forehead, and she said, Great, just great, but I get it. For him, a place without symmetry is like a place filled with monsters. Anyone would be afraid of that place. Patty then said, Say One-chan, it's nice as an explanation, but what if it's just because they are all bombs? Liz pondered it for a second, and said, You know, that's a good point. Kid still didn't get up, and Liz said, Come on, kid, everyone is faking to the death here. If you give up, the Kishin will be reborn. If you, the Shinigami, don't go, who will? Kid refused to get up, saying, It's no use, I'm just shit. Liz sighed and said, Patty, do that thing you do. Patty nodded, then she closed her eyes, and while her head was tilted slightly, she said, Get moving, damn it. Kid was then rushing down the hallway, cursing at Liz and Patty the entire time, the bombs going off as he flew by. Liz patted Patty on the back and said, That always gets him going. Iruka and Free rushed down the hallway, Free on all fours, Iruka on her familiar. Her familiar was starting to slow down, so Iruka patted it on the head and said, It's okay, we're almost there. Free kept looking forward and said, Powerful guys fought here before. We're getting close. Iruka sighed and said, We must inject the black blood into the Kishin. At that point, he'll be at his weakest, and Medusa can kill him. Free then said, Now it's my turn, but to do that, I'll need your familiar. Iruka raised an eyebrow and said, What do you want from Otama Jackson? Warning, the next few scenes will involve massive amounts of insanity, and content that can be described as slight torture. Be advised, Maka stood across from Krona, her body moving in unusual ways, a testament to her newly acquired insanity. Soul was busy trying to keep the pressure of madness from getting to him, and the ogre said, Go. Maka suddenly charged forward, swinging her scythe in unorthodox ways, only to have her blade slice at the back of Krona's neck. Krona raised her blade and stabbed it into Maka's forehead. Krona was shocked to see Maka grab the blade and pull it out of her forehead as if nothing happened. Giggling madly, Maka kicked Krona in the chest, forcing her back. Maka grabbed Krona's head and said, My blade is dull, I think I should sharpen it. Maka pressed Krona's face into Soul's scythe blade and ground her against it, causing a large laceration to appear on her face. Krona cut her blade into Maka's arm, hoping to lop it off, only for it to be caught by her underarm. Maka giggled and said. Want some more? I want to see your tongue and eyes lie on the ground. Krona backed away, Maka's behavior having even someone like her creeped out. Soul felt the madness press down harder and said, What's the matter with you, Maka? You can't let the madness take over. The ogre sighed and said, But now, things are becoming a lot more interesting. Maka held her own tongue between her fingers, making Krona cringe. Maka then jumped onto Krona and started to bite her on the back of the head, seeing as Krona tried to turn away. In her mind, Maka saw what her body was doing and was feeling disgusted. Ugh, if Naruto-kun saw me like this, I would never live it down. She heard Soul say, Hurry, Maka, if you wait any longer, the madness will swallow us up. Maka mentally nodded and said, All right, I understand. She spread her wavelength in a manner similar to a sonar. If I can find Krona's soul, I may be able to find a way to stop her. Something about her is just off. Naruto lit a cigarette, his blade sticking to his back in the meantime. Once he took a drag, he grabbed the hilts of his blades, and Medusa said, My research on the black blood is finished. Only thing left to do is inject it into the first Kishin. My plan is a success. Naruto gripped the hilts of his blades and said, So by creating her, it proves you finished your research, though now I'm curious. What will you do with her after this is all said and done? Medusa merely let a smirk cross her face and said, Such an embarrassing question. Do this, do that. Continuously giving orders, I brought up that child to be completely dependent. Simply a useless creation. I think I became like a mother. Naruto gripped the handles of Oathkeeper and Oblivion, the swords fading away, only to be replaced by Void Gear and Soul Eater, the blades covered in a dark aura. He then said, But you don't care about her at all, do you? You said it yourself, she's your child. I will ask again, what will you do? Medusa smirked and said, What do you want me to say? Idiot. Are you even able to understand? It's not reasonable for me to take care of a person in need. Is it because she's a child that it changes something? Histories of abandoned children are so boring, then what? Happy? At least I'm relived. She noticed him trembling, and she said, Are you gonna cry? She then felt the hand around her throat and saw Naruto's arm, only to see gray thorns stretching out of his sleeves. She looked into his eyes and only saw hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. Naruto growled out, You bitch, how can you justify that? You simply say, it's not reasonable. That's bullshit. Histories of abandoned children are boring? Bullshit. To someone like you, who could be so heartless as to disregard something like that, I say fuck you. Now I bet you wonder why I'm so pissed off. Well, I'll tell you, Medusa, Spirit Stein. Spirit was shaking, even in his weapon form, and even Stein barely dared to breathe. I'm so pissed, because like Krona, my life was hell. You tried being hunted by the people of your own town, just because of something you never consented to. You try making friends, only to have them snatched away. I saw friends, comrades, loved ones die in front of me, and each time, I could do nothing to stop it. There were only a handful of people in the world who knew my pain, but they were killed too. Now I see why Krona is the way she is, thanks to you. But guess what, you're gonna die, but she won't be abandoned, I'll see to that. Medusa barely managed to say. But in Florence you acted like. She felt his hand squeeze tighter and he said. Like what? Like I hated her? Oh no, that was for attacking my friends. I've always been far too overprotective of them. Now I wonder why. Yes, because I used to never have any. But it doesn't matter to you now, does it? Naruto then felt two familiar snakes appear out of his shoulders, and he said, Well, it's nice to see you again. The snakes hissed and he heard. This woman is vile, such hate. Kill her. Kill her. Naruto raised Soul Eater above his head, and swung it down, hoping to cut off her head, only to jump back when one of her snakes tried to bite his head off. He then thought, this is not gonna be as easy as I thought. I just hope Maka-chan is having better luck. Krona, as a chibi version of herself in her own mind, drew a circle in the sand around her. How will it be, a better place? Here, this is my zone, inside the drawn line. What must I do? She kicked the sand for a bit, then said, I'm tired of kicking, nothing wants to live here. It's surely because the sun doesn't give enough light for things to live. It's better to do nothing. She sat on the sand, and her shadow stretched out before her, and said, "Hi! I'm Krona." Krona sighed, and thought, "That's right, even if I do nothing, she always appears." They then proceeded to play a game, with Shadow Krona asking question, yet Krona would pass at answering every time. When the total got to 42, Shadow Krona said, "We are at the limit, we need to progress." She then vanished. Krona started to cry, as she remembered herself and Maka introducing themselves. "That's what I said, I'm Krona McKenzie." She looked up as she heard someone walk up, and saw it was Maka, or a younger version of her. Maka playfully said, "Boo!" startling Krona. Maka walked closer to the circle, and Krona waved her hands in way to stop her, saying, "No, don't. Don't enter, this is my circle, no one ever enters it. This is the only place I can be calm." She was startled when Maka jumped over the line, as it was something that never happened before. Maka looked back at the circle, and to Krona's horror, started to erase the line, covering it till it was no more. On the outside, Krona snapped. She let out a loud scream, as black spikes of black blood erupted from her body, in a manner similar to her bloody needle technique. Soul heard Maka call out from the madness, and he heard, "Get me out of the craziness quick!" Soul floated toward the madness, it taking the form of a lake, and pushed his hand through, though having a difficult time of it due to how dense it was. He saw Maka reach up, and managed to grab a hold of her hand, causing the ogre to curse and Maka to gain control of herself once again. Maka saw Krona, and smiling slightly, Maka placed Soul by a pillar, and slowly walked over to Krona. Soul tried to stop her by saying, "Where are you going? Do you want to get stabbed?" Maka ignored Soul, and when a spike tried to stab her in the neck, she leaned her head over, causing the spike to scratch her neck, rather than stab it. To the surprise of both Soul and Krona, Maka embraced Krona, the spikes freezing and completely returning to Krona's body. Krona then heard, "I understand now your wavelength. I didn't know that you didn't understand physical contact. You are the way you are because of Medusa, right?" Krona slowly nodded and said, "Yeah, I even gave up trying, I thought it was useless. I even thought I was useless." Maka playfully bopped Krona on the head with a book, and said, "Well, that gonna stop. Besides, you don't have to be alone anymore." Krona remained silent, and Maka said, "I'm not the only person who will help you, you know, Naruto-kun will too." Krona froze and said, "Him, but he..." Maka smirked and said, "Relax, I have no doubt he'll at least wait to hear your side of it first." So she slipped off one of her gloves, and held out her hand, "Wanna be friends?" The response she got was Krona hugging her, and Maka could tell she was crying. Maka merely patted her back, and Soul changed to his human form, and said, "Well, a fear of human contact. You can say I have it too." He then got a faraway look, and smiled. Naruto paused mid-swing, and smirked. Medusa noticed and said, "It seems their fight is over. And the black blood, it's gone. I can't feel it anymore." Naruto chuckled and said, "Is that so? Seemed to me that Maka, the one you thought was gonna die, actually not only beat Krona, but found her wavelength, and freed her. Looks like your research turned into a big bust after all." Medusa scowled, but dodged as Naruto slashed at her neck, and she noticed he was moving slower than she saw in his fight against Free. She then thought, he could easily have killed me by now, what's his game? Maka and Soul merely stood watching Krona sob, and Krona said, "This is the first time I've actually cried like this. I'm not even sure of why I'm crying." Soul sighed and said, "I would hate to break up this touching scene, but Maka, we need to hurry on ahead." Maka looked back at him and said, "I know that, but I don't feel right in leaving her here." Krona took her head out of her hands and said, "I'll be fine, you need to help your friends, right?" Black Star ran down the hallway, and he kept feeling Tsubaki shake, and finally asked, "Is something wrong?" Tsubaki looked back with a glare and said, "Yes, there's something wrong. I hate the fact we had to leave Naruto-kun alone with that bitch." Black Star skidded to a stop, nearly tripping his own feet, and said, "Whoa, I've never heard you curse. But a more important point, I'm not worried about Naruto at all." Tsubaki raised an eyebrow and said, "Really?" Black Star grinned and said, "Of course not, he's the strongest guy I know, besides me of course. And he even has Dr. Stein covering his back. Heh, if anyone needs to be worried, it's that witch Medusa. I get the feeling she'll be in pieces by the time this is over. But enough talking, Naruto has his job, and we have ours, right, Tsubaki? Tsubaki smiled and said, Right, let's get to it, Black Star. Kid was racing down the hallway on his Beelzebub, taking note of the sheer wreckage that was spread around. He felt a chill go down his neck and said, I sense a Kishin nearby. A hallucination of scarves filled his vision, and the image of 3 eyes made him freeze. Liz, seeing he was distressed, asked, Is something wrong, kid? He shook his head clear and said, Yeah, I've never been this stressed. He continued forward, stopping when he heard Patty shout, Kid, behind you! A source of heat! Kid flipped out of the way, just in time for a beam to narrowly miss him, causing him to fall off his board, and as he looked in the direction it came from, said, Damn it, an attack from that distance? Where did it come from? He saw a figure in the smoke, and when the smoke cleared, it was free in his wolf form, his mouth smoking, showing it was he who fired the blast. Kid scoffed and said, Damn, is he really immortal? He must be, as that might be the only reason Naruto didn't take him down. I'm a fool, I got distracted by the insanity and was almost caught in that blast. Kid took his sin stance, and began to fire at Free at a fast pace, each shot not harming the werewolf at all, passing through him as if he wasn't there. Not that Kid saw that. Kid cursed and thought, I have only one chance, I can't waste time here. I need to dash. He was cut off as Free tried to swipe at his legs, only for Kid to dodge, Free bringing his other hand for a second swipe, only for Kid to yet again dodge, and flip away from the werewolf, and he said, In that case, Liz. Patty! Let's go! He raised his arms and said, Soul Reason Ace, execution mode. The twin pistols Liz and Patty were known for shifted to their cannon-like state, the countdown set for Kid's best technique. Evaluation of the resonance stable. Noise 1.8%. Feedback in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Death cannon. The large blast enveloped Free's form, the resonance stopped, and to the trio's shock, Free still stood unharmed. Free then charged, leaving Kid with barely any room to dodge. Kid then noticed the surroundings, and slowly fell to his compulsion, trying to figure out what went where. He slowly started to lose his mind, Liz desperately trying to talk him out of it, but it wasn't until Black Star charged in, Tsubaki in her ninja blade form, his knee hitting the back of Kid's head. Kid hit Black Star in the head, a sign of him regaining his mind, and Liz, capitalizing on it, said, Hey kid, that guy looks a bit off, doesn't he? He has a ball and chain on his left, but not his right. Liz smirked as she saw Kid scowl, and he said, You're right, how disgusting. Black Star, let's get rid of him. Black Star grinned and said, I was thinking the same thing. Black Star rushed at Free, Kid providing cover fire. Free moved out of the way as Black Star tried to slash at his sternum, only to curse as he noticed Black Star stabbed him in his stomach. With his back turned to Free, Black Star slashed Free up to his shoulder, and swung his blade to his side. Kid noticed that the attack did nothing, and thought, there's no mark on him at all, unless that's it. Kid walked in front of Black Star, and Free growled out, What, you want to cut me to pieces? Kid shook his head and said, No, that would have been completely useless, and would be not symmetrical. In my opinion, we can't do a thing to you. Free smirked as he slowly changed back into his human form, and said, In that case. Black Star nearly freaked out when he saw Kid walk through Free partially, and Kid asked, It seems our friend here is actually an image, a reflection. Illusion, is this your magic? Free nodded and said, Yes, spatial magic, holographic vision. Free, who had been standing on Aruka's familiar, turned to her and said, They know. While ignoring her complaining, he then said, How did you figure it out? Kid replied, You didn't react at all to any of my shots, and none of Black Star's attacks were effective. I wondered if you were real or a reflection, and then your first shot touched my back without leaving a mark. It was then I began to doubt you were real. Also, I'm really afraid of immortals, it's why I kept my distance, an immortal is really just a cheater. He then turned around and pointed an accusing finger at Black Star and said, And you? You really thought you could kill him? Black Star laughed and said, No, but why not, huh? I couldn't feel a thing when touching him. You thought I didn't realize that? Kid bopped him on the head and said, Then why did you take out Tsubaki? Tsubaki merely giggled at their childishness. Kid summoned his skateboard and said, An idiot with a weapon is still an idiot. Let's go, Black Star, we need to hurry. Free merely chuckled as he slipped his shirt on and said, It's already too late. The image disappeared as the real Free jumped off Iruka's familiar. Both the werewolf and witch stared at the seal sanctuary. The room before them was covered in intricate carvings. A single eye was on each pillar of the room. On the main door, a triangle with an eye on each side, the eyes connected to create a second triangle, the points being the eyeball. Iruka shivered and said, The Kishin is inside there? Free nodded and said, Yeah, come on, we need to catch up to the brat. Free pushed the doors open, and as the duo walked into the dimly lit room, they both felt a chill go down their spines. Played perfect insanity by Disturbed. It always goes well with this next part. As they walked, Iruka kept feeling as if she were being watched, but quickly tried to shake the feeling away, only to feel it grow closer. She tried to say something to Free, only to see him walk away, while she then turned to see if they were followed. Only to turn back around and wish she hadn't. In front of her was a tall figure, dressed in a suit, scarves covering his face and hair, with a bit of his pitch black hair sticking out from under it at certain points. The only thing she could see of the mask were 3 eyes, staring unblinking at her. The figure had 2 of its scarves wrap around Iruka's neck, the witch too frozen to try and react. She slowly whimpered out, Fr Free. The figure, the Kishin, slowly started to pull its mask up, showing its teeth. It opened its mouth wide, and Iruka, frozen in pure terror, could do nothing as she felt the Kishin's teeth press down around her face and pull up, tearing her face clean off. Free stopped mid-step as he heard Iruka scream. He turned back to see the witch on her knees, covering her face with her hat. He heard her say, My face, I'm scared, I want to go back. Free kelped to her level and said, Your face? What's the matter with your face? He tried to pry her hat away and said, Come on, let me see. He pulled her hat away, only to see her face had changed to the face of the Kishin, the 3 eyes and horrible teeth included. He then felt a pain go through him, and saw Iruka's arm go right through him. He then felt Iruka bite him in the shoulder, and tear away, pulling his face with his shoulder. Free had only one thought, Am I, an immortal, gonna die? Iruka was kneeling, a stake poised at her throat, slowly being pushed forward by her own hands. Free, on the other hand, sat in an Indian pose, pressing a guillotine blade down onto his own neck. They soon snapped out of it, tossing away the instruments of their attempted suicide. Iruka asked, What was that? Afari then rubbed his neck and said, A hallucination, brought on by the madness of the first Kishin. They both stared at the doorway, and Free said, He's right in there. Naruto blocked a kick using the dark shield, and tried to cut at her legs, only for Medusa to jump back, guided by a snake that came out of her tailbone. Naruto grinned and said, Well, this is certainly refreshing. Fighting a woman who can actually put up a decent fight. Medusa smirked and said, Oh really? Not a lot of women back home can fight like I can they? Naruto laughed and said, Oh, that is true, some I had to deal with cared more about getting into a bastard Uchiha's pants than actually train. Too bad you weren't in Konoha, you could have set a good example. Oh well, no loss. He turned his heel, making Medusa tense, only for her to feel a foot impact her head. She skidded to a stop, and saw Naruto stab his blades into the ground, and she asked, What are you doing? Naruto grinned, and to Medusa's shock, his eyes changed, the scara turning black as his pupils changed from round to rectangular, and his iris from blood to yellow. Pink mascara surrounded his eyes, and he said, I figured it would be far better if I beat you in the worst way possible, using the taijutsu of the Toad Sage, the frog kata. Medusa had a disgusted look on her face and said, Frog? Oh my dear, not you too. She would have said more, only to dodge a punch by moving to the side, only for Naruto to make a backhand motion, and for Medusa to be blasted back by an unseen force. Medusa groaned out, What was that? Naruto grinned and said, That is a taste of frog kata. Medusa picked herself up and said, Naruto-kun, I want to ask you again, come with me. With the power of the Kishin, who goes beyond human capabilities, we could make this world evolve. If the Shinigami has his way, this world will never change. Naruto started to laugh, surprising both Medusa and Stein. He then said, "Change? You think this world can't change? With every generation, new meisters and weapons are created, infused with the power of the old generation before it. Shinigami has power over death, but he can't change the future generations. For it is with them that the world grows, that it changes. But for you to try and release a great demon, it shows that you don't want to change this world, but destroy it, and that is something I will not allow." Medusa raised an eyebrow and said, "Not allow? You sound like Shinigami." Naruto shook his head and said, "And you sound like a fool. An entire country once went into civil war, and do you know why? Because of a fear of evolution. But enough talking about this, it's time I finally put an end to this." He charged forward, only for Medusa to attempt to spear his body with a hand covered in snakes, flowing like a drill. Naruto backstepped and punched her in her stomach, pinning her to the wall. Blood dripped from her mouth as she said, "Seems I have underestimated you. You deny my invitation, yet I should have known." The arrow on her tailbone rose and she said, "You're dead, I want to chop off your head." The tail speared forward, only for it to be stopped by the Darklings, each of them biting down on one side of the head, pushing it away from their master. Medusa tried to move her arms, only for chains to wrap around them, further pinning her to the wall. Medusa chuckled and said, "So what now?" Naruto sighed and said, "Seems we may be out of time. I shouldn't have played around so much." Free and Iruka stood before the bag holding the kishin, the room as dimly lit as the one before it. The bag itself retained the three eyes, and was held up off the ground by chains, which lead up back to a statue of God that was made twisted. Free then said, "That's the one." Iruka looked at it and asked, "That one?" Free nodded, and Iruka placed the briefcase on the ground, and said a chant which unlocked the case. She then put the rather large needle together, and filled it with black blood, and said, "Okay, here goes." Free then said, "Hurry up, the kids will be here soon." Kid rode in on his skateboard, and immediately saw the needle filled with black blood. He then began to shoot at the needle, hoping to destroy it, only for Free to get in the way. He kicked off his skateboard, only to be lifted by his ankles by the kishin, causing Kid to direct his attention at the illusion. Iruka ran for the bag, while Free felt his chest get pierced by the kishin's arm, and he thought, "Shit, it's happening again." Kid stared into the scarf-covered face of the kishin, closing his eyes as he thought, "It's just a hallucination brought on by the kishin's wavelength, which I felt on the way here. It's only a hallucination." He then looked around and said, "Where's the black blood?" He then noticed Iruka running for the bag, and start shooting, hoping to hit the needle, only for Free to get in the way. Black Star ran past Kid, and Kid said, "If I keep aiming for the black blood he won't move, now's your chance, go." Black Star nodded, and Kid then warned, "Watch out, the kishin's madness will make you hallucinate." Black Star grinned and said, "It's okay, my sixth sense is really bad, I can't feel any insanity." Kid smirked, and Free saw Black Star jump over him, Tsubaki changing to her U2 mode and said, "Iruka, watch out! Behind you!" Iruka turned around, a bomb in her hand, and she tossed it at Black Star, the force of the blast knocking them both on their backs, and the needles slide out of her hands and across the floor. She stood up, only for the kishin's madness to hallucinate, making her think it was drooling on her, giving Black Star a chance to slip past her. He nearly reached the needle, only for Otama Ajiksun, Iruka's familiar, to sweat it back toward his master. Black Star gave the frog a punch to the jaw, knocking it out. Iruka then got ready to insert the needle, careful not to go too fast, or it could miss the mark. Black Star rushed in order to stop her. He jumped, his sword already prepared for a downward slash, and in an instant, the needle was slashed in half, and the two halves fell out of Iruka's hands, the witch too stunned to do anything. Black Star jumped for joy, saying, "We did it! The kishin can't revive now!" Naruto and Medusa were still at the gridlock, the Darklings trying their best to keep the arrow from beheading him. Medusa grinned and said, "They failed." Naruto felt a wavelength pass through the area, and he covered his eyes and started to laugh. Stein tensed and said, "Shit, insanity is spreading, they didn't make it." Black Star looked at the bag and said, "No way, I sliced the needle, I stopped them." Kid shook his head and said, "No, your help made it worse. You didn't get the needle, what you sliced was the statue. It's a bit ironic, you focused so much on the needle, you tapped into the sixth sense, and it made you hallucinate, if only for a moment. Free grinned and said, Excellent. Black Star collapsed, as he said. I failed, I can't believe it. Stein and Spirit watched in horror, as Naruto slowly shook as the Darklings pushed the arrow back against the wall. Medusa, in a moment of gloat, said, are you crying that your little friends failed? Naruto slid his hands down, and to her horror, he wasn't crying, but laughing. His eyes showed insanity. He then spread his arms out, and his blades rose from the ground, and into his hands. When they touched his palms, however, something changed. Void gear faded away, the hand that occupied it was covered in a ball of bandages, creating something, and Soul Eater was covered in a white-black glow. The result was two new blades. The way to the dawn greatly resembled the Soul Eater, but the once curved wing was now straight, and the blade's guard is composed of one angelic wing and one demonic wing, similar to the guards of Oathkeeper and Oblivion, respectively. Also, a dark angelic wing has been added to the top of the original blade of the Soul Eater to act as the teeth of the key. Its token is the Heartless emblem, but without the spiked bars crossing it. Medusa felt her breath itch in her throat, but it was not from the appearance of Way to Dawn. No, it was from the blade in Naruto's other hand. The blade was still in the form of a key, but the teeth were shaped out of the eyes Azura was known for, the shaft covered in bandages, an eye design covering them. The guard was a triangle, in the design of the seal that was present on the door to the Kishin's chamber, an eye on each point. The keychain was a single inverted eye, and Naruto had a slightly insane look in his eyes as he said, Birth of madness. This power, it's intoxicating. Now I will destroy you, using the very power of madness you wanted to bring back. He heard the darkness say. Your power has grown, it seems the Kishin is awake. You must have latched onto its madness, and created a blade out of it. You might be able to tap into a bit of the Kishin's power. Naruto started to laugh madly, and Medusa felt a pain coming from her side. She then heard, Goodbye, little snake. She felt a bit of weightlessness, and her torso landed on the ground, Naruto laughing madly, the Darklings joining in, a mark of a third eye glowing on their heads. Naruto felt himself pulled into his mind, and found himself in his mindscape, yet it had vastly changed from when Kyuubi took residence here. Instead of a sewer, he found himself on a stained glass platform, with a design of himself, surrounded by many circles, each containing a shadowy figure. But what surprised Naruto was that a few of the figures were revealed, as well as to his shock, a picture of Soul Eater crossed against Way to Dawn, Void Gear, Chaos Ripper, Oblivion crossed against Oathkeeper, a symbol of the two darkling snakes biting the other's tail, two blades that looked like beams, rather than real blades, and a line connected their picture to Naruto's. The first was that of a teenage boy with silver hair that covered his eyes, and wore an outfit similar to Naruto's own. The second was that of a masked figure, wearing black and red armor that reminded him of muscle tissue. The third was that of a brown-haired teenager dressed in a style similar to samurai, with a black shirt and hakama pants. The fourth was that of someone dressed in a coat similar to Naruto's, though his face was covered. The fifth was of a man with black hair, in a business suit, with two guns sitting at his feet. The sixth wore a coat much like his own, yet had tan skin, yellow eyes, and silver hair that was strangely similar to the brown-haired teen. He looked around, and saw several blades sticking out of the ground in front, the pictures still shaded. The blade resembled Sephiroth's Masamune sword, although its handle and blade differ in keeping with the design of a keyblade. The keychain's token is made to appear as Sephiroth's single wing, hence the name, and the teeth of the blade were in the shape of a fireball, the tail of the fireball splitting into three, making the teeth. The keychain token is tied to the hilt with a red cord. The second blade was still enshaded in the picture with Oblivion and Oathkeeper, and was one of the more sword-like blades, possessing a curved, notched blade that bears a slight resemblance to Soul Eater and Way to the Dawn, with a noticeably sharp edge. Its color scheme is derived from a fusion of Roxas's Oathkeeper and Oblivion keychains, and the handle is composed of the same checkerboard pattern on Roxas's wristband. The blade's design is also covered with references to Roxas's Nobody nature. The usual Nobody thorns make up the teeth and rain guard, which is black and rounded. The chain links are heavily stylized versions of the Nobody emblem, and the full Nobody emblem adorns the hilt. The token itself is Roxas's Nobody Thorn charm. KH2, FM2 become 1. The next blade he saw was one of the most disturbing appearance by far, as it had a spiky, black guard resembling demonic wings, a horned, demonic head just above the handle, 2 barbed shafts, and teeth resembling a battle axe split into 3 almost claw-like protrusions. It resembled the Oblivion to a degree, but with 2 shafts and a different head. It also contained 2 demonic blue eyes, one on the keychain and the other one on the head, similar to that of the Soul Eater, Way to the Dawn, and Void Gear. Its shaft and head are adorned with several twisting, silver patterns. KH, BBS No Heart. Another blade looked darker than the others. It has a simple design of red and black, akin to the Kingdom Key, with its teeth forming the outline of a heart. The handle remained pitch black, as was the shaft and teeth of the key. The guard remained blood red, and like 2 become 1, and 1 winged angel, was one of the few blades to have a defined blade edge. KH Dark Heart. Naruto started to look around, and he heard. Man, this kid looks okay, but can he handle what he's about to hear? Can it Vanitas be glad you're still even able to exist, even like this? Something that I can consider generous considering all the shit you pulled. Bite me Terra, I was following orders. You want someone to blame for you losing those little pals of yours, blame Xehanort and yourself. Last I checked you screwed up too. That is enough out of both of you, as it seems our friend is able to hear us. Yeah, you two better not keep this shit up, and if you do, I'll gladly put a bullet through your empty skulls. Now Jackie, I doubt that's needed, after all, these two have a bit of bad blood. I don't care. It's pissing me off, and I'm much less patient than I usually am. Naruto grew a tick mark on his head and said, Alright, who the fuck are you guys, show yourselves. He heard a few of them chuckle, and multiple dark corridors opened, each revealing the ones in the picture. They then began to introduce themselves, with the first saying, The name's Riku, first Twilight user, and I see you've taken to using Soul Eater pretty easy. Naruto nodded and said, Okay, but that still doesn't answer who the hell you guys are, and why you're here. The masked one scoffed and said, You want to know? Fine, my name is Vanitas, former apprentice to Xehanort, and the one who originally used Void Gear. You see, each of us are user of darkness in one form or another. As to why we're here, well, when your heart was open to darkness, we were pulled here, and ever since, you've been using our powers quite well. Hell, I'm impressed, and that's saying something. Naruto saw Vanitas glare at the brown-haired teen through the glass of his mask, as he said, The name's Terra, former apprentice to Arrakis, and unfortunately, Vanitas is right, we are all darkness users, and so are you. Ever since we were brought here, you've been given a bit of our powers, as well as our strongest blades, and while some of them have yet to be awakened, as well as some of the others, it's clear to see that you've been using them very well. The hooded man snorted and said, Well? Are you kidding, Terra? You saw how he used Riku's Soul Eater to tear those plant men apart just as we all did. The kid's a natural. Terra glared down the line and said, Shut it, Xemnas, I don't want it to go to his head. Naruto grew a tick mark on his head and said, Still here, you guys. Xemnas cleared his throat and said, Apologies, young one. I am Xemnas, former leader of Organization 13, and user of the Void, as well as Darkness. You see, while it was us who gave you your powers when we deemed you worthy of having them, in Vanitas' case, however, he stepped in, as it were, when you fought that Krona girl, and you still have a bit of my own power, while I held a bit away from you. Naruto nodded and said, So, I just need to prove I can use your power, before I get it, am I getting it right? Xemnas nodded and said, Now Naruto, I believe you should get to know the others. Naruto turned and noticed the other two, and the hooded boy lowered his hood, showing he had brown hair in a style similar to how Naruto used to have it, spiky and highly unkempt. He then said, The name's Roxas, number 13 of the Organization 13, and former user of Oathkeeper and Oblivion. The man in the suit then spoke up and said, The name's Jackie Estacado, former hitman, or rather, Don of the Franchetti crime family, and Darkness user. I hope it doesn't give you too much trouble, because it was nothing more than a pain in my ass, even though it saved mine more times than I care to say. They all then heard the Darklings say, Jackie, you wound me so, didn't I reunite you with your precious Jenny? Jackie scowled and said, Yeah, After I fucking die, you bastard! The Darklings just laughed. Naruto smirked and said, Alright, now that the meet and greet is done, what about the ones that I don't see here? I'm guessing I can't use their powers or blades yet. He was then shocked, as were the others, as each blade that remained in the ground slowly rose out of it, and they slowly spun around him, with two become one and one winged angel each landing in his left and right hand, and Xemnas said, It seems they chose for us. Go forth, young one, we will have much to talk once this is over. Naruto nodded and vanished, and Xemnas said, You deem him worthy of your power, Sephiroth? A dark figure with a large wing coming out of his shoulder stood at the edge of the platform, and said, I do, he is one of us, and he will face a very powerful enemy. It was in my best interest to see he survives. Roxas grinned and said, Oh, this is gonna be fun. Vanitas laughed, and said, For once I can agree with you there, Roxas. Beneath Shiburzan, the bag holding the Kishin started to bulge, and Kid, in his frustration, began to shoot it, but couldn't make a single mark on it. The Kishin then pressed against the bag with his head, making it stretch over him. Iruka stared in horror as it changed, the body pushing outward, the hands slowly pushing upward. The Kishin was slowly put his skin back as it should be. Maka paused as she felt the wavelength pass over her, and she said, This kind of wavelength, the Kishin must have been revived. Soul, back in weapon form, asked, Where are the others? Maka shook her head and said, I can't tell where they are, the insanity is blocking everything. The Kishin was stretching, pulling, forcing its skin back into its proper place. It then pulled on the skin of its arm, as if it were rubber. He then stumbled forward, in front of Iruka, and as it opened its eyes for the first time in 800 years, it screamed, as loud as possible, in her face. This caused her to scream as well, the noise waking Black Star back to consciousness. He then saw Azura and said, So that's the Kishin. Tsubaki, Demon Blade, I'm gonna take down this half-awake bastard. Tsubaki shook her non-visible head, and said, No, I can't. You're too injured. If you use that now, I'll devour your soul. Black Star, being stubborn, said, Follow my orders. Demon Blade form now. Tsubaki refused, so Black Star placed her on the ground and said, Fine, then just sit there and watch. Naruto found himself standing over Medusa, birth of madness, and weighed to the dawn covered in blood, Medusa's body cut in half. Naruto closed his eyes, and said a silent prayer, as birth of madness faded away, replaced by two become one. One winged angel was on his back, along with Nevin. He turned away, walking toward the sealed chamber. When he felt something bit him on the shoulder, he saw it was Medusa, and he threw her off, and despite her saying, I love you, Naruto-kun, Naruto stabbed her in the head with Way to the Dawn, and said, An uncaring being like you doesn't know the meaning of those words. He heard the Darklings chuckle. This is the right way, kill more. Naruto looked down the hallway, and disappeared in a dark corridor. Black Star charged at Azura, elbow forward, and said, Take this, you naked pervert! Black Star Big Bang Wave! Black Star impacted into Azura's back, and he felt the backlash of his own attack. He reared his hand back, but Azura flicked his wrist in front of him, only for Black Star to be blasted back a second later into sweet unconsciousness. Kid cursed, and started to shoot at Azura, until he pulled his skin back, and flung it like a rubber band into Kid's forehead, leaving a mark in the shape of his eye. Kid then felt a backlash, and collapsed. Azura then proceeded to grab his skin, and started to stretch it into scarves, making a makeshift toga wrap around himself. He finished with a mask made out of scarves, 3 eyes covering it. He then shouted, The one with the red shirt! You need to wear more clothes! How nice it must be to have muscles! Free sweat dropped, as he saw Azura break through the ceiling, 4 scarves trailing behind him, and he said, Was he talking about me? To the shock of Liz, Patty, and Tsubaki, Maka jumped off the stot, and grabbed onto one of Azura's scarves, and tried to use Soul to stop Azura's ascent by digging the scythe's blade into the side of the makeshift shaft. Free then felt a chill go down his spine, and turned around, only to be pierced by what looked like a pitch-black tentacle, which picked him up and threw him across the chambers. The still conscious weapon turned their attention to it, and to their shock saw Naruto on the other end. Tsubaki shouted out, Naruto-kun! Maka-chan went up that tunnel, she went after the Kishin! Naruto's eyes turned black, and his hair turned pitch black, and he said, "Is that so? Well then, I'd better head up there myself." Tsubaki was about to ask how, when to her shock, another demon arm came out of Naruto's back, and impacted the statue, and pulled him up, only for another to stab into a side of the shaft, and pulled him up. City streets, Blair and Mizune were starting to attract a crowd. The reason? They were on top of one another, their breasts pushing against each other, and it looked like Mizune's top was about to come off. Mizune tried to push Blair off when Blair said, "Aren't you a witch? Why not use magic, you filthy rat?" Mizune shot back, "Why don't you go first, you loser cat?" Various guys were giving cat calls at the display. As the two witches traded insults, one of the guys noticed the ground shaking, and he said, "Hey, is the ground shaking? What, you getting excited over there?" "No, he's right, it's really shaking." Blair took notice and said, Are you shaking? So disgraceful." Mizune smirked and said, "Oh, it's not me, it's just that Iruka and the others soused." The ground erupted as the Kishin broke out. As he started to float in the air, Maka lost her grip, only for Soul to revert to human state, to cushion her fall. To his shock, however, they were wrapped in a demon arm, and lowered to the ground slowly. Soul looked at the other end, and saw Naruto come out of the hole, the demon arm leading back to him. The arm vanished as he made his way over to them, and he asked, "You two okay?" Soul nodded and said, "Yeah, we're fine. Maka got a bit banged up on our way up though." Naruto smiled and said, "She always is a bit of a stubborn one." He then knelt to her level, and kissed her on the forehead, and whispered, "Rest now, this is my show." Naruto then saw skull-faced groups of wrappings, and he said, "Must be a secondary seal if he ever gets out, but that won't hold." Free crawled out of the hole, Iruka and her frog form on his shoulder. They saw Azura get tied up with the seal, but Free said, "The Shinigami's seal activated." Iruka asked, "Is he alright?" Free nodded and said, "That ancient seal won't hold him." Azura lifted his arm, and the seals ripped easily, their age having weakened them. Iruka looked behind her, her mouth gaping wide as she asked, "Free, you said that cube would last an hour, but it's only been 40 minutes. Free scoffed and said, "I bluffed a bit. I'm a man, I want to look good." Naruto scoffed as he said, "You get once chance, Shinigami. If you fail to bring him down, I will." Azura's mask parted, revealing his face to be as pale and thin as the rest of him, a third eye on his forehead, as he said, "You, Shinigami-sensei." Shinigami, who was using 4 mini-rockets to keep himself afloat, then asked, "It's been a while, are you alright? You seem a little light. You usually wear such heavy clothes, but now so few, feeling anxious? Azura scoffed and said, "You too, you sound so childish, and why change that mask of yours?" Shinigami said, "I've created a school for meisters and weapons. If I kept the old mask, I would have scared the kids away, and even make the younger kids cry. Those seals are old too, so they might be a bit scary too." Azura then said, "Even your speech is childish." Shinigami sighed and said, "I just got used to it. Now I know you woke up, but it's time for you to die again." Shinigami charged, giving Azura a Shinigami chop that hit the Kishin square in the face, blasting him down into the city streets. Azura laid in the crater, laughing as his mask closed over his face, and he said, "Shinigami, do you know how it feels to have your skin ripped off? I've forgotten, so help me remember it." Azura lashed out with his scarves, each heading right for Shinigami, only for him to have his eyes glow, and a shockwave to cause Azura's scarves to break apart, and cause an electric current to blast back at Azura, causing a large amount of cuts to appear on his body. Everyone watched in awe, though Naruto watched impassively. Azura laughed, as his wounds healed instantly. He then jumped into the air, his weapon Vajra sliding out his mouth as he charged at Shinigami, rings with the eye symbol flowing behind him. The two gods were locked, as Azura pushed forward, while Shinigami tried to push him back with a shield made in the shape of his mask. Azura pushed through, blasting through Shinigami's shield, and taking out a piece of the death god. Shinigami turned, and his voice grew darker as he said, "Damn you, you insufferable demon! I will strip your skin off again." 4 shadowy claws erupted from Shinigami's back, and raced forward, intent on taking down the Kishin, only to be stopped, and Shinigami cursed, saying, Damn you, this bastard has no openings, so how wait, you knew I can't go that far, didn't you? Azura merely grinned and said, Too bad, sensei, looks like I'm out of your reach. Play One-Winged Angel by Nobuo Uematsu, as it will fit this scene very well. But you're not out of mine, you bastard! Azura felt himself get grabbed, and to his and Shinigami's shock, it was a large shadow claw, and Azura felt himself get pulled down and crash into the streets. Azura looked at his attacker and started to shake. He then said, You, such a dark soul, what the hell are you? Naruto merely said, Your nightmare brought to life. Naruto pulled his arm back, bringing the Kishin to him, and in a second drew One-Winged Angel and delivered multiple cuts to Azura's body. When he let go, Azura started to bleed heavily, only for Naruto to see the wounds close. Naruto then felt the scarves wrap around his neck, only for him to grab onto one, and let a large amount of lightning to run down the cloth, shocking Azura and forcing him to drop him. Naruto then held out One-Winged Angel in one hand and said, That's enough. He vanished, only for Azura to feel multiple cuts across his body once more. Naruto then turned on his heel, swinging his blade with a grace Azura couldn't keep up with. Naruto then grabbed Azura's head and repeatedly bashed the Kishin's face into the pavement, each hit harder than the last. He then threw him down, and with a great leap said, Give into the dark. Multiple orbs surrounded Azura, and he said, Shit bombs dash. The bombs detonated, tearing up a good amount of the scarves, as well as burning Azura's skin, all of which healed fairly quickly. Naruto scowled and thought, This is just like someone fighting me, so goddamn annoying. Naruto felt power rush into him, and a dark aura surrounded him, and he chanted, Descend, heartless angel. Azura felt immense pain rack through his body, and Naruto floated down, blade poised to strike, to end the Kishin's life. Shinigami got in the way, and Naruto said, You had your chance, now step aside. Shinigami shook his head, and said, This is my burden, you never should have gotten involved. Azura, seeing his chance, floated into the air, but said, This is farewell, sensei. I doubt we'll meet again. Azura covered himself in the orb, and zoomed away. Naruto growled and said, You idiot! I had him. I had a chance to kill him. But your goddamn pride! Just had to fuck it up. Now if this world dies, it's on your head. Naruto walked away, his face showing his disgust for Shinigami. Shinigami sighed, and Naruto said, This is the second time a sensei's soft feeling toward a student will cost the world. I hope you're proud of yourself. Deep beneath Shibuya, Medusa's body vanished without a trace, not even the soul was left. Later, a snake would be seen coming out of the sewers, its body covered in arrow marks. Outskirts of Death City, a dark corridor opens outside the city's border, and a figure collapses out of it, wearing a coat similar to Naruto's. The figure regains consciousness after a while, and as it slowly picks itself up, she says, her voice proving her to be female. Ouch, how did I end up here? Last I checked, Roxas beat me in Twilight Town, and I was fading away. Man, I need to find someone who may know what's going on. She then slowly got up, her hood falling back as she does so. Her face revealed herself as a black-haired girl about age 14 to 15, deep blue eyes. She then held a hand to her head, as a headache spread through her skull, and she said, Damn it! She then fell to her knees. The last thing she saw was a figure in a familiar black coat walk in front of her before she fell unconscious. Outside Death City, a man in priest robes walked toward the city, music blaring from his headphones, making one wonder how he can hear anyone. As the priest got close to the city, he stopped, blessed himself with the sign of the cross, and said, The city that death watches over. How many years has it been since I last came to this land? He knelt down for a moment, clutched his cross, and continued his prayer. O Lord my God, give unto these people comfortable lives and deaths. This man was Justin Law, one of the current Death Sides, and holds the record for being the youngest to ever hold the title. Death Room. Sid stood in front of Death, and he remembered why he was here. Flashback. Sid stood flabbergasted as Naruto walked away, and he heard Death say, Sid, our priority is to protect the kids still underground. Sid nodded, and was about to leave when he heard, Also, I need you to contact the other Death Sides, and have them come to Death City. To think, a Kishin would be revived on the very anniversary of a school made to stop them. Sid sighed and asked, May I say something, Lord Death? Death turned to him and said, Of course, Sid, what is it? Sid then steeled himself and said, Well, to be honest, Naruto's right. I mean, I know he was your student, but why did you stop Naruto? I mean, even I can tell he had the chance to prevent his escape. Death sighed and said, I foolishly wanted to be the one to end him. I actually wanted to seal him up again, but as of now, that's not going to happen. Sid turned and saw Naruto walk toward the wall of the city, and asked, He's just getting stronger every day, isn't he? Death could only nod. Flashback end. Death stood in the mirror and asked, Sid, have the other Death Sides arrived yet? Sid merely shook his head and said, As of now, Justin just arrived, along with the 2 others, making 4 Death Sides inside Death City at the moment. Death then asked, And what about the other 4, the other Europe chief for example? Sid merely deadpanned and said, The other Europe chief and the West Asia chief are away on missions and can't come. Death sighed and asked, That's bad news, and what of the South America chief? Sid shook his head and said, The only thing he says is Gao Gao, so we can't really communicate. Death then asked, And what about Africa? Sid answered, They're blocking all our calls. Shibuya's in ladies' room. 2, by the opinion of their former classmates, very lovely ladies were currently washing their hands, and one of them sighed and said, Oh man, I really shouldn't be here. The other woman with her said, What's the matter? You seem troubled. The first woman sighed and said, I shouldn't be here. I can't be hanging around places like this. The second woman looked at the first and asked, What are you saying? The Kishin has been revived. There couldn't be a more important time to be here. The second woman sighed and said, Azusa, you're still young, so you wouldn't understand. I want to get married and retire, but I'm still on active duty, isn't that funny? Azusa shook her head and said, No, that's actually a good goal. These 2 were the East Asia chief Azusa Yumi, and the Oceania chief Marie Muehlner. Marie had blonde unruly hair, an eye patch with a lightning bolt mark covering her left eye. She wore a black long-sleeved shirt, with a skirt that went down to her ankles. The colors of said skirt were yellow in the front, yet black in the back, creating a zigzag pattern as the 2 sides met. Azusa, on the other hand, was more along the lines of proper, as she wore a black buttoned-up long-sleeved shirt, a light blue blouse underneath, the top buttons left open, and she wore black dress pants. Her pitch black hair neatly cut with 2 bangs framing her face. Finally, a pair of square-framed glasses gave her the look of a teacher, or a librarian. Marie cutely pouted and said, Every time, no matter how devoted I am to a man, I get tossed aside in the end. Why do they find me so unattractive? Azusa sighed and said, Men want to escape when they feel pressured by suffocating devotion too. Marie paused, and as the 2 looked at each other from the corner of their eyes, Marie gave Azusa a swift right hook to the cheek, slightly causing her nose to bleed, as Marie shouted, You don't know anything about love! Azusa was on her knees trying to stem her nosebleed, as she said, And you don't know how to pull your punches. Hallway. Naruto walked through the halls on his way to the infirmary, hoping to see if the girl he found had woken up yet, when he heard shouting coming from the nearest ladies' room. He merely walked past it, thinking it was a pair of students arguing over a boy, but he stopped when he heard a loud crash, and before he could get close, the door opened, and he saw 2 women walk out. Azusa and Marie left the room, only to see a teenager with pitch black hair, wearing a black coat decorated with white vines, with what looked like plates forming an X on the forearms, from Ichigo's new Bankai, wearing black leather knee-high boots with the same X plates on the front, and the coat being split into 4 coattails. They then saw his blue eyes change gold for a moment, and were shocked to hear him ask, I see you 2 are Death Sides, just like Spirit, right? Azusa nodded and asked, Yes, we are. How do you know that? Naruto chuckled and said, That will be for you to ask Shinigami. Until then, I'll see you ladies later. He then vanished into a dark corridor, only for a clone to hide in the shadows in order to watch them. Infirmary. Naruto knocked on the door to the infirmary, and it was opened by Nigus, Sid's weapon partner. She was a woman with dark skin, her hair in dreadlocks, all of which were relatively normal, except for the fact that she wore bandages over a good majority of her face, and from Naruto's experience, he guessed she also used to substitute underclothes. She was currently wearing a nurse's outfit, and as tight as it was, Naruto noticed bandages underneath. Glad to see knowing Ino all these years was at least helpful. Nagus noticed it was Naruto and said, "Oh, hello Naruto, it's nice to see you. I'm sure you're here to see if your friend is awake yet, correct?" Naruto nodded and said, "Yes, considering she only passed out, I was sure she needed some rest." Nagus lead him in and said, "Well, you're right, guess Medusa was accurate about you having prior medical training in her notes. I'll be in my office if you need anything, I still need to organize her notes. She certainly left plenty." Nagus left to her new office, mumbling to herself, while Naruto saw the girl sitting on her bed, looking out the window. Naruto noticed she wore a coat similar to his. Her short ink black hair made her look cute, and with her pale skin and blue eyes he had to fight down a blush. He then stood by the windowsill, causing the girl to look at him, and give a light smile and said, "Hey there, how are you feeling?" She turned to him slowly and asked, "I'm feeling fine, I guess it was you who brought me here." Naruto chuckled and said, "Yeah, after all, I'm not the kind of guy who would leave a cute girl out in the desert." He then realized something and asked, "Man, how dumb am I? I haven't introduced myself. I'm Naruto Namikaze, and you?" The girl blushed and said, "My name is Zien, and it's very nice to meet you." Naruto felt rocks stir in his mind, and he heard, "Oh shit." Naruto decided to ignore the voices in his head, and said, "Believe me, I'm charmed to meet you, though I do need to ask, you're not from here, are you? I saw the dark corridor." Zien shook her head and said, "I used to be the unofficial 14th member of Organization 13, until I went out of control and attacked a friend. The last thing I remember is fading away." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, and she said, "I felt cold, the feeling of disappearing was, I can't even say it. The next thing I know, I'm falling out of a dark corridor, and well, you finding me." Naruto sighed and asked, "I see, and as a former member, what can you do? I'm certain you have some kind of skill set." Zien lifted her right arm, and in a flash, a blade appeared in her hand. Naruto flinched as its light shone for a moment, but he saw that it was similar to his own, the guard of the blade that of a yellow square, while the handle was dark blue, and looked like it was wrapped in leather. The shaft and teeth of the blade was silver, the teeth itself looking like some sort of crown. The keychain of the blade was made of 3 circles connected at the end of a regular chain. Kingdom Key. Naruto then felt the weight in his hands, as well as seeing a shocked look on Zien's face. He looked down to see Oblivion and Oathkeeper, unsure of how they got there. He then saw Zien bowing, as well as one could when sitting on a bed, and heard her ask, "Please, I beg of you, teach me." Naruto looked at her stunned, but before he could give an answer, Nagus returned and said, very loudly, "And no sex in the infirmary." This caused both of them to jump, with them in the frightened Scooby-Doo position, with Naruto holding Zien up, and Zien holding on to him for dear life. Naruto nearly dropped Zien as a bright flash filled his eyes, and when his vision cleared, he saw a very amused Nagus holding a camera, with a smirk hidden under her bandages. They both then noticed the position they were in, and with a deep blush, separated, and Naruto noticed that she wasn't wearing shoes, merely stockings, or were they pantyhose? He shook his head of those thoughts, and Nagus said, "Well, I'm glad to see you two getting along. Now since she's awake, she is clear to leave." Naruto nodded, and turned to see Zien putting on a pair of heel boots. Everyone heard a knock on the door, and Stein was at the door, and he said, "Ah, it's good that I found you, Naruto. You and your friend are to come with me. Shinigami-sama is about to hold an important meeting, and he wants you to be there." Naruto's eyes grew cold, as he said, "I see, all right, we'll meet you there." Stein shivered at the tone, yet nodded and left. Naruto then turned to Zien and said, "Shall we go?" She meekly nodded, and the duo were enveloped in a dark corridor, hallway near the death room. Naruto and Zien exited the dark corridor, and as the duo made their way down the hall, Naruto asked, "Out of curiosity, why exactly were you asking me to teach you?" Zien tried to look away as she said, "Well, I saw that you can use a sword, and well, I've always wanted to improve myself, so I was hoping you would help me." Naruto smirked and said, "Sure, I can't say no to such a cute face." Zien blushed, and finally something clicked with what he said and asked, I know this may sound odd, but she paused for a moment, not sure how to word it. Exactly, what do I look like to you?" Naruto stopped in his tracks, and threw her a confused look, until his mind slowly clicked, and he thought, wait a second, I technically came from a different world from this one. If I assume Xian is the same, she also is from a different world. Wait, it was a different dimension, with different rules, hence why the energy is different here from my world. If I'd put that into perspective, Xian must have something that distinguishes herself from others, in her case, a self-altering appearance. I could be wrong, but if that is the case, it would explain a lot. Damn, now that I think about it, exactly how did the others influence me? I mean, I got their powers, but did they influence my mind as well? If so, it was most likely Xemna's, not sure to thank him or punch him, maybe both. He was broken from his thoughts when he noticed her looking down at her feet. Naruto playfully patted her head and said, Odd? What do you mean? All I see is a girl with a cute face, and power hidden underneath it. Xian blushed from the praise, and was about to say something when the duo noticed a strange sight. It was Spirit, Stein, and Marie all formed in a line as expected of students, with Azusa leading them. Naruto snickered, then erupted into full-blown laughter. Stein and Spirit, upon seeing Naruto, grimaced, wondering how he was going to blackmail them for this. Azusa looked at who was laughing, and noticed it was the teenager from before, who now had a companion with him. Naruto held in his laughter long enough to say, What wrong, Spirit, Stein? Did a woman finally come along and whip you two into being her bitch? Xian and Azusa giggled at the jab, and Azusa, holding her arm in front of Spirit, said, While not how I would put it, you could say that. But if you'll excuse us, we need to meet with Shinigami-sama. Naruto grinned and said, Well, what do you know, we're all going the same way. I guess Stein neglected to mention that? Stein gulped as he felt Azusa's eyes on him, giving a silent glare. She turned back to the boy, who she still didn't get to hear the name of, only to find him and his companion gone. A tick mark grew on her head, and she quickly clapped her hands, making her 3 former classmates quickly move. Death room. Shinigami couldn't help but sweat drop at the sight before him. Justin was the first to arrive, and while bowing and praising him as a priest should to his god, Shinigami couldn't say a word in edgewise. Not because of the fact that he couldn't talk, rather that Justin's headphones prevented him from being heard. And while he knew Justin could lip read, wearing a mask certainly didn't help. Justin rambled on. Oh God, why do you not grace me with your words? Oh woe is me, I cannot hear the word of God. Shinigami tried to say. It's not that, it's the... He was cut off, as Spirit kicked Justin in the back of the head, and when the young death scythe turned, Spirit pointed at his ears, signifying that he needs to take them off. Naruto smirked as he saw Spirit take a shot at the priest, but soon the room felt cold as Naruto glared at Shinigami, surprising the 3 other death scythes in the room. It lasted for only a second, and when the feeling vanished, everyone, minus Xian, let loose a breath they didn't know they were holding. Justin, seemingly ignoring it, said, It has been a long time. I, Justin, am at your disposal. Shinigami suddenly took a business tone, as he said, It's good that all of you have come. Now I'm sure you know why you're here. Spirit was paranoid, thinking that he might get demoted or worse, transferred. The Kishin Uzura has been revived. I thought it would be necessary to take a moment and discuss this. However, I don't think the insane, yet cowardly Uzura will do anything just yet. He'll no doubt try to hide somewhere, in order to sort out his mind and build up power. However, Uzura's movements are not our concern at the moment. We need to create some countermeasures. Naruto snorted, nearly attracting the attention of the others, yet Shinigami continued. The wavelength of insanity that Uzura creates, Stein, if you would please explain it. Azusa then turned to Stein and asked, Wavelength of insanity? Could we consider it as Uzura's wavelength? Stein nodded, and cleared his throat. He then said, Yes, we can, but it's a wavelength on the level of a god. It is able to bring out the sleeping madness within the human soul. Insanity is contagious. The moment it revived, I shivered as I felt it, and even Naruto here was under its effect. Everyone turned to Naruto, who merely held out his hand, and birth of madness appeared. Stein and Spirit subtly backed away, and when Naruto dismissed the blade, everyone eased up. Azusa then asked, So, since everyone has madness in them, does this mean everyone will be affected? Stein shook his head and said, No, clergymen of strong faith, like Justin, or those with a strong soul, like Naruto here, should have a low infection rate. He took a drag of his cigarette and said, "But it's not just the general populace we need to worry about. With the outbreak of insanity, there are far worse things." Azusa adjusted her glasses and asked, "Such as the awakening and increase in power of evil beings?" Naruto scoffed, and everyone turned to him, Azusa at the forefront, and she asked, "Do you have something to share with the class?" Naruto's eyes turned yellow with a black scara and said, "Yes, in fact, I do. You talk about insanity as if it's an inherently evil thing, yet I used it to defeat Medusa in a situation where I could have died if I hadn't. But the fact of the matter is that, like Stein said, insanity is in everyone, and it depends on the person if they can control themselves." Stein grinned and said, "That is an excellent point, and Azusa, I wouldn't jump to such conclusions, it makes me want to dissect you." Naruto groaned, as he still wasn't sure if Stein was looking at her with perverted eyes or not. Stein then said, "Because of the wavelength of insanity, various things can happen. Witches who slept for centuries could awaken, and it's not just people. The ancient city of Atlantis will rise from the ocean floor. There's no end to the list of things we will need to worry about." Spirit shook his head and asked, "So, will we expect him to just lay low for a while?" Naruto thought for a second, but before he could say anything, Azusa adjusted her glasses and said, "Isn't the reason the Kishin escaped because of these two idiots?" Naruto noticed her pointing at Stein and Spirit, and he said, "I hate to burst your bubble, but the fault isn't with them, partly it is my fault." But everyone focused on Naruto. "It is also the fault of Shinigami." Stein and Spirit groaned, and almost everyone covered their ears, while Azusa turned to Naruto with her best glare and said, "How dare you accuse Shinigami-sama of causing this? If you are partly at fault, as you say, then you are no doubt trying to pass off most of the blame away from yourself. It's laughable to even think a kid like you could try to tarnish his good name." Naruto scowled, and in an icy tone that made nearly everyone shiver, he said, "Are you quite finished?" Azusa nearly backed away, while Zien was worried for her master. "Just because you weren't here is the only reason I'm not kicking the shit out of you right now for that. And let's make one thing clear, I'm not one of your former classmates, so don't even try to have me whipped like you do the rest of them. And yes, I do hold Shinigami at fault for Azura getting away, because he got in the way. I was 5 seconds from killing the bastard, when your faultless Shinigami had to be noble and tried to do it himself. If he really did want to kill Azura, he should have done it years ago." Azusa felt the harshness of his tone wash over her, and for some reason, she, who usually was the one who liked control, enjoyed being talked down to. But in an act of defiance, she said, "I still highly doubt a kid like you could even fight the Kishin, let alone kill him." Naruto snarled, a shadow of a nine-tailed fox overlapping him, and he said, "I may look young to you, but I've done my fair share of fighting, of killing. I would love to see if anyone in this city could fight me and win, and before you say a single word, ask Shinigami, he'll tell you." Naruto turned away and said, "Shinigami, I would like to ask you to enroll Zien into the academy in mine and Maka's class. As my apprentice, it would be advisable that she stay with me as well." Without any hesitation, he walked away saying, "Let's go, Zien, we need to start your training, as well as meeting the others." Zien followed close behind him as they left the room. Azusa shivered, mentally wondering who he was, and she turned to Shinigami and asked, "Shinigami-sama, who is that boy?" Shinigami sighed, knowing that it was coming, with the 3 death sides wrapped with attention. He then began, "That is Naruto Namikaze. As hard as it will be to believe, he is not from here, or from this world in fact. He originally crashed here after exiting a dimensional rift, and as unbelievable as I know it sounds, it's true. Ever since he came here he's helped the students, whether in lessons outside the city, or right here at home. His power is unlike anything I've ever seen, and he carries a past that only he should talk about." Shinigami then sighed, and said, "But we're getting off topic here. If you want to know more, I would suggest asking Naruto himself about it, but don't try to anger him, and Azusa, this goes double for you." Azusa would have glared, if she weren't busy glaring at Naruto's back. Marie sighed as she saw her by-the-book friend practically disregarding an order, but smirked as she saw a light tinge of pink on her cheeks. Shinigami gained everyone's attention as he said, "Now let's see, Spirit was praying that he wasn't what he feared, being transferred. I think it's time for a personnel change. Spirit nearly had a heart attack, yet it was calmed as Shinigami said, Now, Spirit, you'll be staying as my weapon. Spirit looked at him with surprise as he said, You're okay with a guy like me? Shinigami nodded and said, Out of all the other Death Scythes, you are the only one who can actually be called a Death Scythe. Take pride in that. Both Justin and Spirit knelt in front of Shinigami's mirror and said, Oh God, what merciful words. Justin, thank you, I'm so happy. Spirit, Shinigami sighed and said, In return, we're ending your stint as Stein's temporary weapon. From now on, I'd like you to do your utmost not to leave Shibuya. In addition, I'd like another of the Death Scythes to remain here in order to reinforce its defense. He turned toward Marie as he continued, Marie-chan, I'd like you to be Stein's new partner. Marie pointed toward herself in confusion as she said, Me? She then gained a panicked look as she said, Oh man, wait just a minute. I don't really want to work. Even the reason I became the Oceania chief is because it's a peaceful area without much work. I don't want a Shibuya post. My marriage will be delayed even further. Stein laid a comforting hand on her shoulder as he said, It'll be okay, you're a hard worker, even if it is unconsciously. Marie's sweat dropped and said, Please don't say that. Azusa spoke up saying, Shinigami-sama, what is it that you'd have me do? Shinigami thought for a moment and said, As for you Azusa-chan, use the breadth of your worldview and try to track down Azura. Also, I'd like for you to take over the Oceania chief's post in Marie-chan's absence. Noticing her slightly downcast look, he mentally smirked and said, If it helps, you will have to come here personally for your reports. Azusa raised an eyebrow, wondering why she had to come personally, rather than use a mirror, as there was no reason to. Shinigami then turned to Justin and said, As for you Justin-kun, he then noticed that Justin once again had his headphones in his ears, and said, Justin-kun? Spirit and Azusa gave Justin a swift kick to his back, making him fall forward and knocking the headphones from his ears. Justin then gave Shinigami his attention as he said, Now Justin-kun, you shall remain in reserve. From now on, Shibuya's going to have to change too. Our guiding principle is it's a brutal but cheerful life. Well then, you are all dismissed. As the group began to leave, Shinigami called Spirit and said, If you would please remain Spirit-kun, I need to talk to you. Spirit was nervous and said, Sure, what do you need to talk about? Shinigami sighed and said, It's about Naruto-kun. Spirit raised an eyebrow and said, If you're wondering if he's stable, he is. Shinigami was taken aback, as he didn't expect Spirit to catch on. Spirit, on the other hand, had his mind flashed to the previous night. The vision of Naruto with a look of madness filled his head, and he thought, Naruto's a lot stronger than Stein, both in his power and the strength of his soul. That blade he created must allow him to channel his inner madness safely. I hope so, because I wouldn't trust my Maka with anyone else. Death City Local Park. Kid, Tsubaki, Soul, Black Star, and Patty were standing on the basketball court deciding what to do, when Black Star said, Hey Maka, let's play some basketball. Maka was sitting on a bench on the sidelines with a book in her hands, trying to relax, as everyone had a day off from class after last night's occurrence. Considering this, they were in casual street clothes, rather than their usual attire. Maka looked at him with disinterest as she said, But you said I could just read off the side. Black Star merely said, Oh, I lied. Maka tossed her book at him, hitting him in the head. Though he quickly felt a hit to the head, and when he turned to see who did it, there was no one, as Kid and Tsubaki were the closet to him, yet they weren't close enough. Maka puffed her cheeks in frustration, but she felt arms clad in black circle her waist from behind, and she heard, Still got a hell of an aim, Maka-chan, nearly hit me too. She turned and saw Naruto's grinning face, causing her to blush. Tsubaki giggled at the cuteness, when she too felt Naruto's arms circle her waist, and a kiss on her cheek. She tried to turn around, only to see a puff of black smoke. She then thought he used clones. Naruto then looked at the others, who either had an amused or amazed look. He then scratched his cheek and said, Is something on my face? Kid and Black Star, for some reason, bowed and said, We are not worthy, O Great One. Naruto chuckled nervously, and he felt someone tap his shoulder, and remembered Zien was with him, and he said, Oh, everyone, I would like for you to meet Zien. Who will be joining us? Zien waved nervously, as Tsubaki and Maka quickly dragged her away for girl talk. Naruto looked to Black Star and Soul and said, "Somehow things are gonna get crazier around here." Kid was off to the side, and he thought, Naruto is certainly stronger now, and yet I can't help but feel a trace of madness from him, and not just any madness, but that of Asura's itself. This is troubling. Naruto then broke Kid from his thoughts as he asked, "I don't see Liz anywhere, what happened?" Kid sighed and said, "She wanted to come, but unfortunately, she said she didn't want to ruin her nails after she did them." Naruto shook his head and said, "In other words, she just wanted to go shopping." Kid nodded dumbly while Soul and Black Star pulled Naruto away and Soul asked, "Naruto, seriously man, what the hell was that last night?" Naruto sighed and said, "That was just a taste of how much my powers are growing. I still haven't tapped into all of it yet." Soul shivered and said, "Geez, a lot of the kids at school saw you fight the Kishin, so expect some unpleasantness to happen tomorrow." Naruto waved it off and said, "Trust me, that's not the first time. I'm more worried about fangirls." Both Black Star and Soul shivered. Soul then asked, "Hey Naruto, you talked to Maka yet?" Naruto shook his head, and Soul said, "Well, I think you might know, but that girl Krona is under Shibuya's watch." Naruto nodded, and Soul continued, "And it was Maka's idea that the two of you will be helping her." Zien felt nervous, as if the two girls were sizing her up. She felt someone jump on her back, and saw it was Patty, who chuckled. Zien then asked, "So I guess you two know Master quite well?" Maka raised an eyebrow at the master part, yet Tsubaki asked, "So, you're Naruto-kun's apprentice? When did this happen?" Zien blushed as she said, "Naruto found me last night after I arrived, but I passed out, so I'm not exactly sure when it was. Next thing I remember we were talking in the infirmary, and I asked him to teach me." Maka smirked and said, "Oh? And by that, you're hoping to get closer to him, huh?" Zien blushed and said, "What? I mean, I know we only just met, but sure if he wants to, but..." She caught herself and quickly covered her mouth. Both Tsubaki and Maka grinned, and Maka said, "Well, at least you're honest. The name's Maka Alburn. If you're going to be in our class, we might as well get to know you." Zien nodded, still a bit nervous, but Tsubaki cut in and said, "I'm Tsubaki Nakatsuka. It's very nice to meet you." Tsubaki held out her hand, which Zien quickly shook, though she noticed that Tsubaki was being a bit more forceful, and Tsubaki pulled her in close and said in her ear, "I can tell Naruto-kun likes you, so here's a piece of advice: do anything to hurt him, and you won't run far enough." Zien shivered, and Tsubaki, in a more chipper voice, said, "I hope we can get along." Stein and Marie watched them as they interacted, and Marie sighed in exasperation and she said, "There's no chance of me finding someone to marry when there are only kids around." Stein chuckled, and Marie asked, "These kids, are they Shibuyan students?" Stein nodded and said, "They are, and as of tomorrow, they'll be your students as well." Marie smiled, and she got up to stretch, saying, Well, I don't have a lover to begin with, but before I'm married I might as well do some work." She then thought for a moment, and as she and Stein walked away, she said, That's right. Since this change happened so suddenly, I don't have an apartment to stay in, so until I do, let me stay with you. You live in a research facility, so you must have plenty of spare room, right?" Stein nodded and said, "It's fine with me, just don't complain if you get dissected." Marie's sweat dropped and said, "Really? I'm trusting you here." Neither of them noticed Spirit watching them, as his mind flashed to more of the conversation he had with Shinigami. Flashback. Spirit looked at Shinigami's shocked look and said, "It's not hard to think, but Naruto is strong, he'll overcome madness." Shinigami shook his head and said, "I understand your concern, and I have faith in Naruto-kun, despite his new attitude toward me at the moment. But on to a more pressing matter. Stein." Spirit raised an eyebrow, then Shinigami continued, "It looks like he's realized it himself, but the wavelength of insanity is starting to influence Stein. Even though you said that Naruto-kun took on Medusa all by himself?" Spirit nodded and said, "Yeah, the kid looked almost heartbroken when he finished her, but he did it, the entire fight, his power was all over the place." Shinigami sighed and said, I see. Well, with that being said, I placed Marie with Stein in the hope that her wavelength will be a positive effect on him. Be that as it may, I want you to keep an eye on Stein. Just in case. Flashback and Spirit sighed and thought, things are really gonna change here. He noticed Stein and Marie sitting on a bench, and as he walked over to them, he said, They shouldn't be out like this, they should be resting. Stein shook his head and said, Geez, they need to be at ease. Besides, Naruto-kun and his new apprentice are being quite the center of attention at the moment. Spirit shook his head and said, They can't be at ease, not with such an abnormal atmosphere. Spirit felt someone tap his shoulder, and saw it was Naruto, who said, You're wrong, even in this world. After a night like how last night went, the best thing you can do is try to push it to the side, at least for a little while. By pushing it out, they can focus on a normal life, even for a little while. After all, they're human, as we all are. Stein and Spirit nodded, used to him passing out wisdom like that, though Marie had stars in her eyes. She then said, That sounded so cool. Naruto sighed and said, Just telling it as I know it. Stein then asked, By the way, you mentioned being on missions before, and you were a ninja before arriving here, so have you, killed before last night? Naruto nodded to Marie's surprise and said, I have. You don't get in this profession without doing it eventually. Stein nodded, it all making sense. Naruto then vanished in a puff of smoke, clearly being a clone, yet freaking Marie out. Stein then noticed the kids all gathering together and walking off, Naruto amusing them with the telling of him fighting Azura. Stein smirked, glad he was able to watch something like this. The next day, death room. Sid stood in front of Shinigami's mirror and asked, Sir, about the demon sword under our care, we have yet to start the admission process. What should we do? Shinigami thought it over and said, We should put her on a trial run for now, and see where it goes from there. Shibuya's in guest rooms. Maka, Naruto, and Zeon were walking down the stone hallway to see a specific person, Krona. Maka was smirking while Naruto and Zeon had large blushes on their faces, and tried their hardest not to look at each other. The reason for this happened earlier, as they were waking up. Flashback. Maka, Sol, Naruto, and Zeon arrived, with Blair greeting them in her cat form. To Zeon's surprise, yet to no one else's, Blair turned into her human form, and quickly glomped Naruto, saying, You had Blair's so worried, Naruto-kun. Naruto patted Blair's head, and said, It's alright, Blair, you know I'm too damn stubborn to die or anything. Zeon tapped Maka on the shoulder and asked, Who is that? Maka groaned and said, That's Blair, a cat witch. You don't want to hear the story? Naruto snickered and said, Why wouldn't she? Because it was one of your epic fails? Maka scoffed, and walked into her room, thinking of a way to get back at Naruto. Sol sighed and said, Shouldn't have done that, she'll get back at you for that. Naruto waved it off and said, Like hell she can, I'm a prank master. I painted my village's largest monument without getting caught till I was done. Zeon gave him a starry-eyed look, which Maka saw from her room. She then smirked, her plan formed in her mind. Later that night, Naruto was fast asleep on the couch, having Zeon sleep in his room for the time being. Maka, with Blair accompanying her, snuck into Naruto's room, and saw Zeon laying on the bed, wearing a large overshirt, along with her bra and panties. As quietly as they could, Blair and Maka lifted Zeon out of bed, and carried her over to the couch where Naruto was sleeping. Thankfully, Zeon had a petite figure, similar to Maka, or they never would have pulled it off, at least without waking her up, or waking up Sol to have him help. They laid Zeon on the couch on top of Naruto, and noticed she oddly cuddled up to Naruto, Maka taking a couple pictures for blackmail. The next morning, Naruto awoke and felt a bit of weight on him. Thinking it was Maka, as Blair was a bit heavier due to being older, he stroked her cheek, and gave her a kiss on the lips. Hearing giggling, he opened his eyes fully to see a pair of blue eyes looking back. This made him freeze, as Maka's were green. He pulled back from the kiss to see it was Zeon, her face red as a tomato. She then let out a loud "Eep" and passed out, in a manner that reminded Naruto of Hinata. Naruto blushed, and gently lifted Zeon off of him, before laying her on the couch, then rushing to his room to change. His only thought was, Maka actually got me, and Zeon might just kill me when she wakes up. Flashback and, thankfully, Zeon didn't yet had a blush on her face every time she looked at Naruto, while Maka was feeling happy. They were broken from their thoughts as Sid came around the corner and said, "Why hello, good morning you three." Maka bowed with respect and said, "Hello Sid-sensei, are you going to see Krona too?" Sid nodded and said, "Actually yes, see, we're gonna put her on a trial run soon, but unfortunately, we can't seem to get her to talk. All she does is sit in a corner and mope." Naruto sighed and said, "Does she seem to have a dead look in her eyes?" Sid nodded, and Naruto went straight for Krona's room. Sid raised an eyebrow and said, "I thought it was just that she didn't know how to deal with zombies." Xian widened her eyes and asked, "You're a zombie?" Sid nodded, and Xian covered her head in a dramatic fashion and said, "Please don't eat my brains." Sid and Maka's sweat dropped, and Xian smiled and said, "Just kidding. Besides, I've seen a lot of things, but never a zombie. What's it like?" Sid began to animately describe how it was to be a zombie, only for someone to stumble into their section of the hallway. Marie looked around for the 100th time, saying, "Oh man, what should I do? I'm lost. But I know I was just down this hallway." Sid then noticed her and said, "Why hello Marie, what brings you down here?" Marie pouted and said, "I'm hungry, I got lost trying to find food, and I might just die from hunger." Maka, Xian, and even Sid's sweat dropped, and Sid said, "But aren't you an alumni of this place?" Marie scoffed and said, "But whenever I come here, this place has so many stairs, floors, and hallways it's like a giant maze, it's crazy." Sid sighed and said, "That's because we're trying to get the kids to have strength, a strong will and soul." Xian raised an eyebrow and thought, "Soul? Is that like strength of the heart? Master should know more." Her face grew red as she thought of Naruto, and Maka nudged her with her elbow, a grin on her face. Xian then noticed Marie in front of her, and Marie asked, "Why hello, we've never been properly introduced. I'm Marie Mjolnir, who are you?" Xian gave a respectful bow, and said, "My name is Xian, it's very nice to meet you." Marie quickly waved it off, saying, "Don't bow, it makes me feel old." Maka then asked, "Sid, who is she exactly?" Sid then placed a hand on Marie's shoulder and said, "Maka, this is Marie, a death scythe like your father, and for today, your chaperone." Marie then looked around and asked, "Where's the black-haired boy? He was just here a second ago. What was his name? Naruto, I think." Sid sighed and said, "He went on ahead, going like a bat out of hell." "I don't know why." Maka then asked, "How do you know Naruto-kun, Marie-sensei?" Marie chuckled nervously and said, "Well, he was at a meeting between Shinigami-sama and a few of the other death sides, and well, he had quite a few choice words with Shinigami-sama." Marie then asked, "Exactly, how do you know Naruto?" Maka felt her face turn red, and she said, "I'm actually his girlfriend." This made Xian blush, but turn away, thinking that she had been kissed by a taken man. Marie, however, gushed and asked, "Oh young love, it's wonderful." They arrived at Krona's door, and Sid began to say, "All right, this is her door, just dash." They noticed Naruto leaning against the wall, holding his head, muttering something. In Naruto's mind, however, something was happening. The piece of madness he absorbed from the Kishin was surfacing, as well as whatever the hell Medusa did when she bit him. In fact, he was seeing Medusa right in front of him, and she was saying, "Going to take care of her, aren't you? The child I made, it's almost like you're her father now." He tried to shut it out, but Medusa wouldn't go away, and she said, "You have a soul that can repel madness, even suppress it, but now you've been infected by it, and your soul is only making it stronger. Don't deny it, embrace it." Medusa got closer, inches from kissing him, and possibly making the insanity worse. Naruto felt the darklings rise to the surface of his mind, driving out the hallucination, and he heard, "Such a foolish woman, our host is stronger than you." Naruto then thought, "Thank you, I would have gone crazy from that alone." "Think nothing of it, we learned from our previous hosts." He then felt the darklings fade back into the depths of his mind, and he heard Maka and Xian come to his side. Naruto picked himself up and said, "It's all right, I'm fine, we still need to see Krona." Maka looked at him with worry, while Xian almost couldn't look at him in the eye, or at all. Deciding to hold it off for now, Naruto knocked on the door, and silently had one of the darklings slither under the door, and through it, he saw Krona sitting in the corner behind the door. After retracting the darkling, Naruto opened the door and said, I know you're here, Krona, you can come out now. To Sid's surprise, and to the surprise of the others, Krona jumped at Naruto, almost glomping him, shouting, "Otu-san!" Maka, Zien, Marie, and Sid all had their jaws drop, and Naruto nearly fainted. Maka then tapped Krona on the shoulder and asked, Krona, why are you referring to Naruto-kun as your father? Krona looked away and said, Because Lady Medusa is my mother, and if her plan had worked, Naruto-kun would be my Otu-san. This caused shock to spread to everyone, except Naruto, as he suspected as such. Maka then changed the subject by asking, What were you doing in the corner like that? Krona sheepishly said, Well, being in Mr. Corner calms me down. Maka's sweat dropped and said, You really shouldn't be calling it that. Marie then came into the room and said, Why hello, I'm Marie, and starting tomorrow, I'll be teaching your class, Krona. I'll have to study just as hard as you, Krona. Krona sheepishly waved from behind Naruto, and Sid decided to peek into the room and said, Having someone with the same concerns must put you at ease, nice one, Marie. Krona immediately cowered in the corner and said, A blue person is looking over here, it's scary, I don't want to leave the room. Naruto then kicked Sid in the side, forcing him out of the room, and said, God damn it, Sid, you're scaring her. Get the fuck out of here. Sid was leaning against the wall outside the room, a depression cloud over his head, as he said, I had only one person's share of blood, that the kind of man I was. Zien was sitting next to him, her own cloud over her head, thoughts raging, he's already with someone. And now he's acting as someone's father. I should be happy, but I can't shake this feeling, why? Inside the room, Naruto pulled Krona back to her feet, and said, Now, Sid may be scary to look at, but he's a nice guy. Maka then said, Yeah, even though he looks like a blue-skinned gorilla. This caused everyone in the room to laugh, and Marie said, So, this fleeting school life isn't going to come to us if we just sit here. Let's get out there. Naruto chuckled, as her enthusiasm reminded him of Anko, and oddly himself. Just as they were about to leave, a voice from nowhere said, I'm not in the mood, you pigs. Everyone looked at Krona's back, and Naruto and Maka groaned, knowing who was coming. Sure enough, Ragnarok sprouted from Krona's back, but instead of the large human-shaped figure they knew, he was chibi-sized. Naruto started to slowly chuckle, before rolling on the floor in laughter, while Marie looked on in curiosity, and asked, What is that? Maka giggled and said, It's nice to see you, Ragnarok. Seems you shrunk since last time, though. What happened? Ragnarok tried to swing at Maka, but couldn't due to his new size and said, I had my souls confiscated by Shinigami. I so hate you right now. He tried harder to hit her, but couldn't, as he said, Shit. I'll smack you, what? I can't reach. Frustrated, Ragnarok turned his focus on Krona and said, It's your fault, bitch. Die, damn it. Maka giggled and said, If it's like this, then I can get close without getting hurt. Ragnarok then looked at her and did something strange. He grabbed the edge of her skirt and lifted it, with Naruto on the floor, giving him direct view. Naruto turned away and heard Ragnarok say, Those panties are more boring than I expected, you ugly girl. Maka had a tick mark on her head, and swung a book at Ragnarok, only for him to put Krona's face in the way, though Naruto stood in the middle, one hand stopping Maka, the other around Ragnarok's throat. Marie looked shocked, and thought, He's faster than when someone uses Mayazuna form. To her surprise, Naruto had the darklings at Ragnarok's throat, and said, So help me, if I ever see you try shit like that again, I will find a way to remove you from Krona, and feed you to my inner demons. The darklings hissed, and lightly bit down on Ragnarok's throat to prove a point. Ragnarok nodded and went back into Krona's body. Maka giggled and said, I think he wet himself. Naruto shook his head and said, I don't think he can. Naruto then led them out of the room, and they took a tour of the school, with Naruto helping if they got lost, and Maka noticed Zien looking at Naruto, almost with a depressed expression. As they approached their classroom, Maka pulled Zien back as Naruto and the others went in, Soul there to greet them. Soul then said, Hey, how's it going? Naruto grinned and said, Going good, just giving the new girls a little tour of the place. Marie sheepishly said, But Naruto-san, I was part of a past class. Naruto chuckled and said, Oh really? With the way I had to correct you, I thought you never came here. Soul chuckled and said, "That's cold, man." He then turned to Krona and asked, "So, how was the tour of the school? Think you can do well here?" Krona, on the other hand, had a depressed look on her face, and Naruto asked, "What's wrong?" Krona hugged him, and said, her voice muffled by his coat, "I'm not gonna make it here." Naruto patted her on the head, and said, "Yeah, you can, all of us will help you out, won't we, Soul?" Soul nodded, though it didn't help Krona's mood. Out in the hallway, Maka stood in front of Zien, and blatantly asked, "Do you like Naruto-kun? Don't lie to me, because I know you do." Zien looked away and said, "But I only just met him a couple days ago." Maka scoffed and said, "Didn't stop you from asking him to be your teacher. Besides, let me fill you in on something. I was like you, I doubted it too, but he helped me by telling me something important." Zien looked at her and said, "What was it?" Maka blushed and said, "He said you can't hide how you feel, otherwise it will just slip on past you." Zien looked away and said, "But I never felt this way before, I just don't know if he cares the same?" Zien looked at Maka in surprise and said, "Yeah, exactly." Maka smiled and said, "Oh yeah, you're a girl in love." Zien then had a depression cloud over her head, and said, "But you two are, well, and I don't want to be in the way." Maka grinned and said, "Oh, I guess I have to tell you then." Zien stood silent, and Maka said in a faint whisper, "Naruto's a polygamist." Zien's head snapped up and asked, "What?" Maka smirked and said, "Oh, now you're interested, I see." Zien blushed, not sure how to respond, and Maka said, "We should go inside, they'll be waiting for us." Zien followed her in, and Maka heard Krona's words, and she said, "If you don't feel confident, write a poem." Soul snickered and said, "Really, Maka, a poem?" Soul was then clutching his head in pain, and Maka said, "I do it too, whenever I get worried I write a poem, it helps." Soul then said, "Are you for real? You really are a bit of a gloomy person sometimes, Maka. Shall we get you some counseling?" Soul then felt Maka hit him again. This time he was laying in a pool of blood. Maka then smiled and said, "Let's write one together." Krona then said, "If you say so, Maka." 30 minutes later, Krona put down her pen and said, "I'm done." Naruto looked over and saw her nervously hand it over to Maka and Marie. As the duo looked it over, Soul leaned against the wall and muttered how stupid the whole thing was. He then saw Marie and Maka walk over to a corner, and nearly in the fetal position with the darkest depression cloud in history over their heads. Naruto barely heard them mutter, "So depressing. I'm sorry I was born." Wondering what caused it, Naruto and Soul looked at it, only to end up the same way as Maka and Marie. Black Star then chose that time to enter, and Krona handed him the paper, and even he sat in the corner, with Krona joining them. Soul looked to his left and saw Sid sitting with them as well, and to his surprise, Naruto ended up between Maka and Zien. Death room. Sid stood in front of Shinigami's mirror, and Shinigami asked, "How is Krona doing? You seem down, did something happen?" Sid shook his head and said, "No, but while there is a problem or two, it's nothing that Naruto won't help her with, and the strangest thing, she actually called Naruto her dad of all things. But other than that, she's fine." Shinigami deadpanned and said, "Seriously? Where are they now?" Sid then collected his thoughts and said, "They're currently on an extracurricular lesson to the Czech Republic. Krona went with Maka and Soul, while Naruto went with them, along with his apprentice to, in his words, learn by experience. It's all due to a minor incident that happened there." Shinigami raised a non-visible eyebrow and asked, "What happened?" Sid answered, "Apparently, in one of the villages, a golem started to act violently and attack people. Thankfully, there was no real property damage. In this village are expert golem craftsmen, enchanters. It's a strange place." Shinigami was shocked, and he asked, "Wait a minute! Is it true?" Sid, confused, asked, "Is what true?" Shinigami sighed and said, "Golems can only perform defense, to protect, their moving shields, so to speak. It is unthinkable that a golem could even become violent, or even destroy something. The revival of Azura, golems going out of control. Could it have something to do with the wavelength of insanity?" Shinigami looked at Sid and said, "Sid, contact Professor Stein, I want to ask his opinion." Sid then thought of something and said, Sending Naruto is like sending Stein, a bit of overkill, isn't it? Czech Republic, Seoul, Maka, and Krona rode in on his motorcycle, and Krona asked, "Are we there yet?" Maka, on the other hand, had a different concern. 3 riders, no helmets. If we weren't Shibuyan students, we'd have been caught. A dark corridor opened at the village gate, and Naruto and Zien stepped out of it. Low Village was simple on the surface. The townspeople were out and about, peddling golems of all different sizes, some small, some big. Though everyone had the same kind of large brown gloves. Maka looked around and noticed all of the chimneys that dotted the skyline, and said, "This place is full of chimneys, huh?" Sol answered, "That's because it's a village where building golems is popular. There might be a furnace in every house." Naruto sniffed the air and said, "Oh yeah, there are. No doubt this village makes its living off golems, so everyone pitches in." Ragnarok sprouted out of Krona's back and said, "Let's start eating souls on that side." He received a bonk on his head from Krona as she said, "We aren't doing that anymore." The group noticed the locals eyeing them, and Maka said, "I'm going to ask the villagers what happened with the golem." Krona went with her, while Zien stuck with Naruto and Sol. Sol noticed the looks they were getting, and thought, puppet engineers, enchanters. The tradition of this village is to use those huge gloves to pack in magical power, and need earth to make golems. He then said, "They do not look very welcoming, do they?" He felt Naruto nudge his side, and heard, "So you see it too? How everyone here is giving us the stink eye." Sol nodded and said, "Yeah, I doubt Maka is gonna find out anything about the golem." Zien then said, "You never know, after all, they might need help." Naruto and Sol shook their heads, and Naruto said, "In places like this, they don't even like outsiders, let alone will ask for help. We'll be lucky if someone does tell us." They then noticed Maka and Krona come back, and Maka said, "We didn't find out anything. Any time I asked about the golem that went haywire, they say they don't know anything." Sol scoffed and said, "This village is hiding something." Maka waved it off, saying, "You're just being paranoid." Naruto shook his head, and said, "I actually agree with him, Maka-chan. This isn't the first time I dealt with a village that didn't like outsiders. They just give you that sort of look." Sol nodded, as he saw it on every one of the villagers, yet Maka or Zien weren't aware of it. Krona refused to even make eye contact with people, letting Maka ask. They seemed to get a break when they were approached by a villager, who said, "Hey, you guys, looks like you've been asking around about the incident." They turned and saw a man with spiky red hair, wearing a button-up shirt with jeans, and the village's traditional gloves. Just seeing this guy put Naruto on edge, as he felt a massive amount of bloodlust, but he wasn't sure where. The guy then asked, "You're looking for this village's oldest golem, right? I'll take you to it." Patchwork Laboratory. Stein sat in front of his computer, but something was different. The lights were off, and his computer screen was showing nothing but static, and 3 eyes were the only defined thing. Behind him, 3 eyes opened, and arms started to reach out, as if to yank him away. And as for Stein himself, a look of pure madness was on his face. Suddenly, the lights snapped on. Stein broken out of his trance from the sudden light, and looked to see Marie standing by the door. She then looked at him and asked, "What are you doing with the lights off?" Stein looked at her and asked, "Marie, is there something you need?" Marie nodded and said, "I have a message from Shinigami-sama. He wants you to look into a golem that went berserk in Low Village. I'll make some tea." Stein sighed and said, "Use the cup over there." Marie looked at where he pointed and saw it was a beaker. "You mean this one? Anyway, it seems he wants your opinion on it, Stein. Is there some kind of issue with this incident?" Stein nodded and said, "Though it's charmed, a usable golem has no programming in it to allow it to destroy things. It might be possible to build a golem with a different programming than that of the present enchanter technique. But what raises the question is that it's the world's oldest golem." Marie continued with the tea as Stein said, "It must have something to do with the wavelength of insanity. But the order of it is all wrong." Marie looked back and asked, "The order of it?" Stein nodded and said, "There fortunately hasn't been a single incident related to the wavelength of insanity produced by the Kishine revival. To think that the first incident would be a soulless golem running wild doesn't make any sense." Marie felt it click into place as she said, "That's right. The first ones that should react are humans with high levels of insanity already in them. So a thing like a golem as the first is certainly strange. Stein nodded, and as he put his glasses back on, he said, a golem rampaging should be the last stage of insanity, not the first. But it is, and yet I'm still as frivolous as usual is strange. He started to walk out the door as he said, there should be something about the golem in the Shibuzen library. Tell Shinigami-sama that I'm asking for a little more time. Marie sighed and said, okay, and I even made tea too. Low village outskirts, Naruto and the others were being led by the enchanter Soul, though Naruto had his doubt from the get-go, Soul being the only one who shared his idea. Getting agitated, Soul asked, how much farther until we get to the golem? Soul looked back and said, it's just a little further. Soul stopped, as did Naruto, and Soul said, that's all you've been saying the entire time. Soul didn't even look back as he said, if you ask the same question, you'll get the same answer. Soul glared at Soul's back and said, cut the crap, it's obvious that you and the village are the ones behind this. Maka looked at Soul in horror and she said, Soul, how can you say such a thing? Soul turned around and saw a blade in his face, Naruto holding out way to the dawn, and Naruto said, you're partly right, Soul, but I don't think the village has anything to do with this, just him. Soul had a bead of sweat go down his face as he said, the village has always gotten by selling golems to other towns, other countries. The entrance itself is a ward against evil spirits. If anyone said they didn't know anything is because they're scared. Soul, in a sarcastic tone, said, so what? Are we demons to them or something? He then realized what he said, and saw Naruto tighten the grip he had on his sword, while Zien wondered what was wrong, and Maka said, you should know better than to even say something like that, Soul. Besides, why do you think that? Soul then said, because that's exactly what he's saying. Naruto then said, that's not it at all, is it? You may have them fooled, but I can tell. At first I thought the large amount of bloodlust was from the village, but now that we're out here, I see that it's all from you. The earth started to shake, and the trees rustled. Something was coming toward them. As it came from the tree-line, Maka and Soul were astonished. Cronus showed a bit of fear, while Naruto and Zien showed no fear. Zien took her ready stance, and she noticed Naruto in his own, and she thought, that stance, it's just like Riku's. Naruto grinned and said, well, I'll be damned, you're big, but I've fought bigger. Soul looked at the golem and said, what an impatient woman. Well, guess the secret's out. Shibuzen library. Stein barged into the library, his mind racing as he thought, the oldest golem was made 800 years ago, and demon weapons were created around then as well. The wavelength of insanity, there's something there. Naruto kept the grin on his face, but thought, damn it, I'm not as strong during the day as I am at night, good thing it's a bit cloudy today. Maka and Cronus shivered, but Soul then said, Maka, we need to get ready. He then shifted to his scythe form. Stein looked over the shelf and saw a few books and said to himself, why would a soulless golem be affected by the wavelength of insanity? Something's fishy. Was there something in the Czech Republic 800 years ago? The birth of a demon weapon? He thought for a moment and said, it wouldn't be surprising if the heretic soul responded to the wavelength of insanity. Maka looked at the golem with surprise, as she felt a soul reaction from within it, and she asked, what is that thing? It's a golem, but it has a soul inside. I can feel its wavelength. Naruto grinned and said, ah, come on, Maka-chan, you're a smart girl, it should be easy. That giant pile of rock is nothing but a shell for what's inside. Soul laughed and said, your little boyfriend has it. I have waited 800 years for this, using the same enchanter techniques. I encoded my memories into my child. I did it for 30 lifetimes, constantly being reborn. I thought I'd go insane. Naruto looked repulsed and said, you sick freak, you took over your own children. So grinned and said, and what of it? I had to wait so long, to destroy that accursed Shibuzen, with so much power, I had to bide my time, but now that's done, and now, I get to cut loose, no more of that goody two-shoes shit, I feel free. I can't believe you feel for it. Did you think I actually wanted to help you? How gullible are you? His body started to shift, and Soul asked, the hell is up with his body? Naruto got a strong scent, and he said, oil, blood, steel, and even gasoline. This guy is a weapon, no doubt. So grinned and said, well, seems you got quite a nose, kid, but yeah, I'm a weapon, and a very savage one if I must say. So had changed, much like Soul did, and his form was that of a chainsaw, a brutal and downright evil weapon. And it was in the hands of the golem itself. I don't need a meister, my user is the golem I made myself. Maka held her guard, while Naruto and Xian stood in front of her, and Maka said, This guy is a demon weapon, and what's more, there's a golem with a soul, what is up with this village? Jericho then said, Chainsaw, a traditionally evil weapon. The golem roared as Jericho had the golem slash down at Maka, missing her by inches. Maka glared at it and said, If you keep going, I'll take your soul. Jericho's face appeared in the blade of the chainsaw, and he said, The engine isn't on yet. The golem grabbed the starter cord and gave it a pull, starting the blade, tearing up the ground under it. Maka felt herself get yanked, and saw it was Xian that did it, and she said, Thank you? Xian nodded and said, No problem, Master would be angry if you died after all. Naruto leaped at the golem, and in a downward slash, a large red and black wave erupted, and crashed into the golem itself. Naruto then grinned, and spun his blade by the circular guard of its hilt, and said, How's that? It's something I created quite recently, a technique that takes darkness itself, and my own chakra. The golem got back up, a large scar going across the front of it. Krona noticed something, and said, It's like my Screech Alpha. Naruto grinned and said, Actually, it's thanks to you that I made it, imagine the two of us fighting like that. Krona had the vision flash in her head, and said, I can, Ota-san. Maka felt the pressure of Jericho's soul, and said, What the hell is this? Jericho had a savage grin, and said, I've been around for 800 years, that's 800 years, and all this time, I've stored bloodlust. I'm ready to go, the engine is on, and I'm gonna kill you all. Naruto then noticed the movement of the golem, and said, I got an idea, but I need Krona and Xian to help. You up for it, ladies? They both nodded, even though Ragnarok tried to say they shouldn't, until Krona grabbed him by the neck and said, We're doing this, so get ready, damn you. Ragnarok shivered and said, Damn, he's making you scary, I like it. He then shifted into his sword form, the sword itself being the size of a wakizashi, rather than the nodachi it used to be. Naruto then got Maka's attention and said, Alright, on my signal, I want the two of you to distract him as much as possible. If he controls the golem, that's how we'll get him. Got it? Xian and Krona nodded, and each readied their blade, and Naruto said, Let us go. Xian zipped out of their sight, and slashes appeared on the golem, yet they weren't as deep as they hoped, while Krona scrapped the ground in circular and fluid motions, launching Screech Alphas one after another. Maka looked on in shock, and saw Naruto holding his hands in a praying motion, his sword in the ground in front of him. To those who knew him, they would think he's going for his sage mode, but instead, he was deep in his mind, and he found himself in front of his 9 guests. He saw 3 shadows, but noticed one's cover was vanishing. What was revealed was a very intimidating figure, covered in a black coat that was open part way, long silver hair that almost had Naruto wondering if he was girl, but the strangest, yet most intimidating, was the large black wing on his left shoulder. But he heard someone's voice from his right, and as he turned to the 8th spot on the platform, the black veil peeled away, revealing another. He had the same build and face as Xemna's, yet his clothes were vastly different. Whereas Xemna's wore a very familiar coat, this new person wore black, high-collared, leather coat that has a red interior and yellow lining. This coat is gray from the waist down and has several buttons lining the hips, a belt around his waist, and a second one that extends from the waist and up to the collar to connect to several smaller straps. The 4 shorter straps are buttoned to either side of the front of the collar, while the remaining ones are buttoned to the shoulders to form spalders. A black leather pauldron is attached to each spalder by 3 buttons and 2 straps that button to the rim of the coat, and 2 more that cross over his upper back. On his upper chest is the heartless emblem in the form of a brooch that holds the outer coat together in place of a zipper or buttons. Underneath this coat, wore a white thigh-length vest. This vest is also high-collared and exposes most of the figure's chest, with 3 black buttons and 2 thin belts near his waist closing it up, while the 3 remaining buttons below are undone. Naruto noticed Rika glaring at this figure. The new figure held a smirk on his face, and he said, I guess it's time I introduce myself. I am Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. No doubt you'll need my power for this. Naruto nodded and said, Don't get any ideas either. I'm certain if Rika hates you, then I shouldn't trust you either. Ansem smirked and said, Well thought out, it will be interesting to see if you can earn my power. He then tossed Naruto Dark Heart, Naruto feeling its power flow into him, unlike before. Naruto then vanished from his mind, and awoke to see Krona on the ground, Maka frozen against a tree, and Xian about to get cut in half. He zipped in the way, and he shut his eyes, and he heard a voice say, Geez Kit, what the hell did you get yourself into this time? The saw blade was caught by a large pair of claws, each pitch black, but Naruto said in astonishment, Kurama, is that you? He turned behind him, and saw a black creature holding up the chainsaw. It was gray-black, with a muscular, humanoid body, standing at 8 feet in height with a pair of long, crooked antennae coming out of the top of its head and 4 shorter ones coming out of the back of its head. The antennae on top of its head didn't even look like antennae, rather, they were slicked back, as if they were fox ears. Its demonic head bears some resemblance to that of a fox, with large shadowy teeth, and claws that looked it could rip a man in half. It had small, glowing yellow eyes, blue gums, and sharp teeth. 2 chains crossed over the top of its head and wrap around its antennae, while 2 more cross over its neck and upper back, and 2 chains cross over its chest, with another 2 crossing over from its shoulders and attaching a 5th chain wrapped to the base of its thick neck. It has a blue, heart-shaped hole in its lower torso just below its chained chest that is reminiscent of the heart-shaped hole that appears in various pure-blood Heartless. It has a shadowy tail that connects into the shadow created at Naruto's feet, giving the impression that it is his shadow. The creature smirked in a way that was very familiar, and it said, What's wrong, Kit? Don't recognize me? I guess it's fair, seeing as I'm not a 100-foot giant fox. Naruto smirked and said, Well, I'll be damned, for once I'm glad to see you, Fuzzball. Kurama grinned, his new visage making him even more demonic, and he said, Seems your little vixen's had some trouble, and you've grown. I'm proud to say you were once my vessel. Naruto lifted 2 of his swords, Void Gear and Chaos Ripper, and asked, Can you use these? Kurama took them in his new hands or claws and said, My vessel before you, your mother, was an expert in swords, I can handle it. Kurama turned to where Maka was and said, You sit tight there, girlie, you're covered in binding threads, you won't move till they're gone. He turned back and said, Now then, let's show this brat what happens when you mess with us. Naruto drew out 1 winged angel and said, Oh yes. Naruto rushed forward, and to the astonishment of all present, both he and Kurama ebbed and flowed, weaving through the slow attacks of the golem, and attacked in a sync that made even Shinigami, who was watching from his mirror, stand in awe. When Naruto slashed right, Kurama would cut through the middle, either attack was interrupted by the other. Xian could only watch as her master was making quick work of the golem itself. The golem collapsed, its arms and legs cut off at the elbow and ankle respectively. Naruto then kicked Jericho away from the golem's hand, and raised his sword to destroy the insane weapon, only for his vision to be blocked by a black mass. Stein read through the reports from 800 years ago, and thought a normal golem shouldn't be affected by the wavelength of insanity. However, if you think about the possibility of it being the heretic, it starts to make sense. There should be some clue in the Czech Republic 800 years ago. He looked at the page and said to himself, This incident, there was a mass illusion incident in the country surrounding the center of the Czech Republic. Outdoors, indoors, there are several eyewitness accounts which state that close to 500,000 people had a mysterious black mass about 5 centimeters long on them. It says that the streets were filled with them for as the eye could see, walking along, as if they were passing by. There was even clear proof. Eventually, what that object was became clear. The mass of people were seeing the same thing, and everything, even the path of the illusion leads back to one's place, Low Village. The mass itself was proven to be that of a spider. Wait, that's it. It wasn't an illusion. It was spiders. In order to hide, the heretic spread her body into spiders, and sent them to the 4 corners of the world, to bide her time. And her soul was left in the golem. Naruto burned a few of the spiders away, as Maka, Krona, and Xian saw the spiders swarm from every space in the path, looking like a great black carpet, or an army on the march, and all headed toward one point, the golem. Jericho smirked and said, It's been a while, Lady Arachne. Stein got to the nearest mirror and he said, Shinigami-sama! I figured it out. Shinigami appeared in the mirror and he asked, What did you find out? Stein nervously said. The heretic witch Arachne is inside the golem that went haywire. Shinigami was shocked, and Stein said, I thought it was odd that a golem would react first, but if Arachne is inside it, it would explain it all. This mission is too heavy, I should head over there myself. Shinigami shook his head, and said, No need, remember, Naruto is with them, but I already sent backup just in case, can never be too careful you know. The villagers looked on as a strange sound rang in the air, loud music disturbed some, and drew attention from all. Justin Law had come, bringing an odd motorcycle, with a coffin strapped to the back of it. He said out loud, I wonder, will one coffin be enough? Maka looked at the spiders in disgust, and she and Xian saw Naruto under some influence, as he started to shake, and dropped his swords as he clutched his head, Kurama looking down and asking, Kit, what the hell is wrong? Stein shook in front of the mirror, his hand clutching his coat as he tried to fight the insanity. He then said, I can feel it from here. The insanity inside that thing, that woman's insanity, is prickling my body. The heresy that divided the witch world's greatest disgrace, the witch who first created a demon weapon using a witch's soul. Shinigami looked on in worry, and he said, Hang in there, Stein, resist it. Stein bit his lip in order to get his mind off it, as he said, The mother of the demon weapons, witch Arachne. Maka and the others heard Naruto start to laugh. It was low and soft at first, but as the spiders went into the golem, the laughing grew louder. The spiders pulled the legs and arms of the golem together, as if fixing it. Kurama was stunned, as he saw Naruto's swords vanish, even the ones in his hands. Naruto then held out his hand, and Birth of Madness appeared, only this time, it was covered in black and red energy, and Naruto slipped his finger into the triangle guard, and began to twirl the blade on his finger, a wide maniac grin on his face. To their shock, scarves fluttered out from Naruto's neck, and they saw they looped around his neck. He suddenly became calm, before letting his grin return. The spiders formed together, and a woman began to appear out of the congregation, and Jericho said, The Kishin has been revived. Insanity runs rampant in the world, it has become a grand age while you slept, Lady Arachne. Naruto's grin grew wider, before it faltered, and his eyes turned gold with black scara, a scowl on his face. Jericho continued, Arachnophobia has begun to move. The woman was fully revealed, and she had pale ghostly skin, contrasting her pitch black hair, her hair done in a regal, almost royal fashion, her dress holding her spider theme, it still being a long dress gown one would wear to a fancy ball. She had 2 long sleeves not connected to her clothes, each ending in 4 spider legs. Maka and Cronus shivered as Arachne's wavelength passed over them, and Cronus shivered, and said, She's just like Medusa. Naruto snarled, glaring at the woman as if to melt her. Arache looked over the group, and Jericho was about to say, Lady Arachne, let me explain the situation. She held up a hand and he said, No need, huh? Arachne looked over at Naruto and said, So, you're the boy my dear sister cared for so deeply. It seems you have a piece of the Kishin's madness in you. She then looked over at Krona, the girl shivering at her gaze. She then said, Krona, the little girl my sister made. It seems I've become an ant in the last 800 years. Arachne moved closer and she said, You don't look like Medusa gave you much love. Come with me, and I can provide you with all the happiness in the world. She moved closer, only for a black wave to get in her way, and she saw Naruto standing in front of her, and in a low tone, he said, Get the hell away from her, now. Arachne opened a fan and said, My, so protective. I doubt it's because she's your friend, isn't it? What could it be? Is it that you're her stepfather? Naruto narrowed his eyes and Kurama said, Kit, what the hell have you been doing since you landed here? Naruto, not even looking back, said, I'll tell you after we get out of here. For now, I'll need to focus on this. The madness is creeping in the back of my mind. I can't use it for long. Kurama nodded, and dark energy spread on his claws. Arachne looked at them as if they were beneath her, and said, Jericho, erase them. Jericho, in human form, swept at Krona's neck with his leg, though he felt his body jerk, only to notice his body wrapped in chains, spiked chains that dug into his skin. Arachne traced the chains back to Naruto's wrist. Naruto then rushed at Arachne herself, only for him to feel his chains break, and Jericho above him with his leg in the dropkick, only for Kurama to catch the leg and notice the chains wrapped around it. Kit! This guy has chains in his legs! Naruto then thought, he must be able to do partial transformation. Not good. Soul watched as Naruto fought the duo away from Krona, jealousy rising to the surface. Naruto then had to dismiss Birth of Madness, and drew out Dark Heart, the scarves disappearing. He made a single slash, and a disc of dark energy lashed out at Jericho, who moved to prevent himself from being beheaded. He was then launched back by a wave of energy that cut across his torso, and Naruto looked back, only to see Justin Law. Naruto felt his body give out on him, the use of madness taking more out of him than he thought. He then said, "Shit, looks like I won't get to join in, you crazy priest." Justin finished his technique, as he said, "Holy, Jijuji Shutu." A second slash formed on Jericho's body, creating a cross. Naruto looked at Justin's arm, which now sported a guillotine blade. Naruto smirked and said, "The scent of wood, blood, and steel, that's the scent of a guillotine, all right." Soul looked gobsmacked and he asked, "His arm was impaled by a guillotine?" Naruto sat next to them, Kurama still hovering over them, Xian still out cold. Jericho grinned and said, "That was dangerous, that one shot. If I had been late with wrapping this chain around me, I would have been killed. Well done. Now who the hell are you?" Justin gave no answer, though Arachne gave one for him. "He's Justin Law of the Death Sides." Soul looked on in amazement and said, "What? That guy's a Death Scythe?" Naruto then cut in and said, "Yep, I met him at a meeting Shinigami held, he's the real deal." Maka then spoke up, "Yeah, that's the explosive executioner, Justin Law. 4 years ago, at the age of 13, he became the youngest Death Scythe in history. And he did it all by himself, without the aid of a Meister." Soul felt a pang of jealousy, and Naruto saw it in his eyes. "I'm gonna need to step up training, for them and myself." Kurama then thought to himself, Kit landed in a very strange world, and it seems he's picked up some strange friends along the way as well. Justin then shouted, "Shibuzen students! There are only 2 enemies, so I can end this quickly, just wait there." Everyone awake sweat dropped, even Kurama. Justin on the other hand thought, even having said that, I don't like this guy. Jericho had his own thoughts. This is a weapon without a Meister, just like me. Naruto chuckled and said, "You might want to take notes, Soul. This will be what you aspire to." Soul nearly glared, and he muttered, "But am I not a weapon like them?" Maka sadly shook her head, and said, "No, these 2 are much stronger. They have such strong souls, they're even." Jericho tried to provoke Justin, saying, "I don't really like you. Is it really fun serving Shinigami Father?" Jericho jumped into the air, his chain wrapped around his body, and he spun, drop-kicking onto Justin's shoulder, the blade sitting, until reverse rotation. The blades went into reverse, and had Justin not moved, his arm would have been ripped off. He ducked under the blades, and his arm changed into a giant cuff. Karkin Claw. He grabbed Jericho's leg, and gave him a headbutt straight into his face. "This is a headbutt of love!" Naruto's sweat dropped, as did the others. The 2 weapons separated from their lock, as Maka and the others watched in fascination. Kurama smirked, and he thought, same as those damn ninja battles, but this is more exciting. Naruto tried to move his hand, only to see thread on it, and looked to see it coming from Maka. The thread must have moved off her. He then glared at Arachne, and thought, that bitch cheats. Jericho grinned and said, "The engine is on! What'll happen if you carelessly leave those earphones on? Look like you won't listen to a word I say, ass kisser." Justin smirked and shook his head, waving a finger as if he spoke to a nasty child, and said, "I can read your lips, such dirty words. Such a dirty boy." Naruto laughed and said, "Oh shit, he just played the hell out of him. I like this crazy priest more already." Jericho had a tick mark on his head and he said, "So you can read my lips? You've just been pretending you couldn't hear me all this time. You make me sick." Arachne looked down from her spot on the golem and said, "Jericho." He turned around and shouted, "The hell do you want?" Arachne gave a silent glare, and continued, "I don't like kids who shout." Jericho's manner changed and he said, "What's that, big sis?" Arachne merely said. The golem will run out of energy soon, we need to retreat. Jericho looked at her as if she were crazy, and Arachne continued. They're waiting to welcome us. There will be many more battlefields in the future. Jericho smirked and said, If that's the case, I'll leave it to you, golem. I guess I can't care what happens to that shitty father. He turned back and said, I'll kill you eventually. Jericho picked up Arachne bridal style, and using chains around his feet like motorized skates, sped off with her. Justin turned his attention to the fleeing duo. Wait! Don't run away! What he didn't notice was the golem turning on Naruto and the others. Xian woke up to see the golem rearing its fist back, and instantly clutched at Naruto's arm. Everyone closed their eyes at the impending impact, only for Krona to block the golem's fist using Ragnarok's sword form, and Kurama aiding her in pushing it back. Kurama gave out a loud roar, and shoved the golem back. Justin merely glanced at the golem, and the fleeing witch and weapon, and said, I can't hesitate. Shinigami-sama's divine message was to protect the students and trial period student. He turned toward the golem, his left arm outstretched, his right hand holding it steady. Everyone! Drop to the ground! This is gonna be flashy! The golem turned and charged at him. All the while, Justin began to pray. We, the people of the city of death, beseech you, our God, as Christ is just. Soul looked in amazement, and he said. He started to pray at a time like this. Maka noticed something and said, The prayer is strengthening his soul wavelength. Naruto smirked, and Justin continued to pray, O God, let me be your instrument of peace. I am a pillar of justice, a blade of faith. He jumped into the Sur, and pointed himself down, the vague shape of a guillotine forming around him, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, law-abiding silver gun. A wave passed through the guillotine, in the form of a blade, beheading the golem. Justin then landed on his feet, his right arm outstretched, and he said, Come now, let us pray. Everyone bowed their head, even Ragnarok and Kurama. Soul, however, began to think, Damn it! Even now I can barely do a thing to help. Is he really the same as me? The same sort of weapon? In the end, if Maka can't move, I'm still useless, even with Naruto's help. All I can do is sit on the sidelines. Naruto chuckled, and everyone turned to him, and he said, Well, I'll be damned, that was a good fight there, you crazy priest. Justin smiled and said, Why, thank you. To hear praise from the man who fought and nearly killed the Kishin is certainly an honor. Kurama then lifted Naruto up, and said, While this is all well and good, we need to head back. Justin removed his headphones and said, Yes, we should. I'm glad to see you all safe, even if two of you can't move. Kurama scoffed and said, I got the kit here, even if it's only for a little while. Justin nodded and he said, Now about you, Maka-san. They then went back to where Soul and Justin's motorcycles were waiting, and Kurama started to fade. Shit, guess I don't have much time left. Naruto looked up and asked, What do you mean? Kurama scowled and said, Right now, I'm no better than a summon, and my power is limited from how it used to be. Right now I'm out of gas, so I need to rest a while. He then laid Naruto down, Justin holding him up, and he vanished, fading back into Naruto's shadow. Maka's sweat dropped and said, Guys, what the heck? They had placed Maka in the coffin on the back of Justin's motorcycle. Soul got a funny idea, and with Krona's help, lifted Naruto and placed him in the coffin as well, causing the two inside to blush as they were very close together. Xian giggled, thinking it was good revenge on Maka for earlier. Maka tried to say, I really don't want to ride in this thing. Justin held up a hand to his ear, and everyone copied him, saying, What? I can't hear you. Maka tried to get up, shouting, I know one of you can read lips, damn it. Naruto sighed and said, Looks like we either wait till this shit wears off, or Stein figures something out. Either way, I'm fine with this for now. Maka blushed, and she saw Krona place a flower in the coffin, and thought, crap, this must be what Sid felt like. Forest, Jericho and Arachne strolled through the woods, their path lined by a red carpet. Jericho commented, The hell is a red carpet doing out here in the mountains? Arachne said nothing, but looked up as a voice said, I have been waiting for you, Arachne-sama. I have the most luxurious limousine waiting. True to it, A first-class limo was waiting at the end of the trail, the carpet coming out of it. Arachne merely asked, "And what of the champagne?" The tiny figure in front of her took off his hat and said, "Of course, it is of the best vintage." This was Arachne's butler, Mosquito. He was a short man, barely as tall as a child. He had a white mustache that draped over his upper lip and pointed down. He wore a plain tuxedo, with a bat acting as his tie. As the trio got into the limo, Mosquito sat in the driver's seat. Arachne started to sip her champagne, when Jericho leaned back and said, "Such an uncomfortable car." He picked one leg up, and after starting the bladed chain, sliced the entire top of the limo. He then proceeded to kick the roof, making the entire roof fly off, giving the limo one hell of a sunroof. He then sighed and said, "Now that's better." Mosquito looked as if he were about to blow a blood vessel, and said, "You common, value-ignorant delinquent." He was about to turn his head, when Jericho said, "Huh! What's that? You want to go, old man?" They stopped as the sound of a fan opening entered their ears, and Arachne said, "That's enough. I'm tired, I would like to get to the castle." Mosquito nodded, and hit the gas pedal. Shinigami thought solemnly, and he said, "The Kishin has been revived, and now with the force of insanity running rampant, Arachne has also been revived. It seems we have yet another powerful enemy." Mosquito pulled up to the entrance of the castle and said, "We have arrived." Arachne and Jericho looked on in awe as Mosquito, with tears in his eyes, said, "It's been a long time. Every one is one of the elite. This is the network you spent 800 years creating." Arachne was greeted by hundreds of people wearing black cloaks with a spider mask. They let loose fireworks and party streamers, cheering for their mistress's return. This was the organization Arachnophobia. Arachne smirked and said, "I've won, Shinigami." The end.
Now watch daily exclusive uncensored lemon stories and mature content, along with NSFW images, featuring harem girls characters from the fics. Access all this and more on my Patreon. Click the link in the description to explore.